Okay. Hey, good morning, happy kid. How are you? Oh yeah, it's looking good. Looking good. Oh boy. Good morning, big ads. How are you? Let's see here. Closed at 223.64. Just for that gap fill. Oh man. Doing all right. It's been a cold winter. Ready to get out of the house, I think. So, kind of cooped up. We got a little bit to talk about on AMC this morning. So I didn't cover the day yesterday. It wasn't really much to cover. I mean, just kind of sat there, consolidated on a bottom area. So there was not much to say about it, to be honest, from a charting perspective. It had a lot more action other places in the market. GME was a lot more interesting yesterday than AMC was, but nothing here was completely unexpected. It all looks pretty much as expected. So, I mentioned maybe doing a 50-50 here around the center mark, around 27.64. That's what we got. So I had it going up pretty high, but frankly, like that's technically high enough because it went to the, again, through the middle here. So if you look at the distance traveled, it's pretty much exactly like a double flush you'd expect it to be. So one of the things that I had thought when this started was that maybe this comes back down still. So this has happened on GME a couple times, and it's not very unusual anyways in the market, but there's a sense in which this was built out coming down, and I thought that we were going to come down lower, but we stopped short of it. And frankly, to some degree, AMC did the same thing. It sort of stopped short of coming low. And then what typically would happen is that if you're going to try, even if it's not successful, and it could be not successful, it may not work out that you get enough sellers to drive it back down. But regardless, there's this motion right here, which was pretty anticipated. I mean, like I had in my mind that might happen on that Wednesday, going into Thursday, that we might see an upthrust. And we saw a really small one, and then it went low first, and then it did a bigger one up to the top. But I think I had originally drawn it like this, where I thought it was going to come down and do like that kind of thing. And it sort of happened like over here off to the side, which is, normal. Just to be off a couple days is not a big deal. But that beginning motion is really a testament to what happened here, which was they created a shelf, right? And then you're generating a liquid center. This is a place where people are trading. You're starting to trade across this like 27.66 area. And then you have an upthrust down. So it's like basically it's a widening. I mean, if you want to put it like very simply. So you can see like it's a whip around here. And you can see that widening take shape pretty easily. And that widening spread doesn't always indicate a change of direction. Sometimes it does, depending on how it's moving. Like if it's going downward and the volume's increasing like it is here, and it's widening, it's likely going to indicate a change of direction. The volume's not exactly like blowing up here. It keeps returning back to very low to average volume on GME. Every time it makes these moves, it kind of like resets and just kind of chills out. But normally if it's widening and heading low and the volume's like increasing, volatility usually would signify you're probably going to turn around. This makes sense because when we had developed these targets, we said maybe it comes down into 25 area down here. Again, didn't quite get there. So my thought was that, all right, well, I could just either say this was enough and it's not going to test again, or suggest that this was probably a liquid test, again, to sort of check the waters beneath this 2688 bottom, which was a floor back here, and there is a gap that was generated from it off of that floor. The next floor down being the 2610 level. Every one of these little areas acted as a support coming up. And usually you're going to come back and test here. And my theory is that it comes back, creates a bottom, and then actually think it might take back off to the upside. So I've been just kind of waiting on GME. I mean, I really haven't charted it very much because nothing's changed. So what I had suggested was that perhaps that widening continues and we get a push up and then come back down. And so far it looks pretty accurate. That doesn't mean it's going to necessarily keep going that way, obviously. But right now it looks pretty close to right. So the middle marker that you see generated on this preliminary support region right here becomes pretty important overall. And we've gone through this before because we did this on AMC several times over the last couple of years. We went back and looked at the prelim supports and how that value going into them like interacts with the rest of the setup. And here's what we normally see, and I don't think this is going to be super controversial or anything. But what we normally see is that when you drop off the edge and come back to that middle, this value, and it might also be, this is a little complicated. It might actually be up here. I'm not like 100% sure on this one because it's determined not by just the ledge, but also when you lose that uptrend. So it's kind of debatable because here there's technically two that got lost and one's right there. So like, anyways, somewhere in the middle here, this would be like a rough estimate. That value ends up being like in some ways like a short entering the play kind of value, and then those positions later are covered in some kind of a strategy to exit. Now, it entirely depends on how the bottom sets up, because I could put it here and suggest to you that that was it, or it goes up a little higher and then it comes back down, whatever. But I don't think this is it. I think this is like an auto reaction. You'd have to kind of go back and look carefully, and I haven't done this yet, so hold on, let me try to do it. Yeah, I don't think this came over the top, which actually is okay. It's just not super bullish right now. But that does leave room to maybe push and advance later. So I think that, I don't think this is the exit is what I'm trying to say. So what I would suggest is that normally, and it's kind of complex here, but normally what I would suggest is that this is probably going to be the result of this over here. And if it doesn't do it there, all the better for us, because we may actually see it break earlier, something like this, and just kind of return right back to the top, basically go from the same floor. So depending on how far down this goes, I think could determine whether or not this is still to be fulfilled, and this is those shorts covering the positions or not. Usually the result of it is some kind of a channel. So like if you already have that in mind, and we might actually have something like that here. This looks a little like a head and shoulder right now, doesn't it? This is downward motion. But if you already have like this in mind, then you could potentially use this to help determine like, all right, did it come up far enough? Maybe. You know, according to that one, it did, because this would be from here to here and then here to here, and that would generate a channel, right? Ignoring the top. But if you use that top one, I don't think it came up far enough. And this actually, to me, rings a little bit more true, because you can see here that flat area right top. I mean, it's pretty cookie cutter. Like it looks like somebody took a razor and just right there. That does match. So there's a really strong sense of continuity there. Another thing that I have done in the past is looked at this as a 50-50. And so what I've done is I've said, okay, you take that and you move it, and gets a little bit more complex, but you can take that and move it to the center mark, the LSPY, and you can suggest that this is the range that you're going to be working in. So it's actually building out a range. If that's the case, then again, you would probably suggest that this is pretty much done. It may come a little bit higher, but it wouldn't be like significant. It would be up to here like 29.50 maybe. You know, we've pretty much already been there, but be like 29.50. So you would suggest that, yeah, perhaps that's where the range is going to build out. And again, that means that you could have a low at 25.97. This seems to ring a little bit more true for me, because I think that, again, I don't necessarily think this is 100% what's going to happen, but it's certainly very close. So what I saw like last Wednesday was that I thought this was probably just doing a widening. And in the grand scheme of things, that's okay, because if this ends up forming a nice like double bottom area, I think it's going to be a lot stronger for GME to build out here long term. It's boring. It's not very exciting to watch, but that's the nature of it. So the alternative, which we were just talking about, which is this higher mark here, is quite, it's quite extreme. So we'll do this one as well. I think it's possible. I just don't know. Yeah, this kind of rings true. So this gives me a sense of continuity there as well. So it goes from 29.94, which was, again, I think a really important supply zone, all the way down to 25.60, which would be the bottom. And that totally makes sense. So you see how like this motion right here, you're like, I can't see anything, Booksy, your chart's a mess. You see how this motion right here has largely defined, this marker has largely kind of defined this range. And then if you look at the sense of like widening, you see that it's the same there to there, even like this low hit. That's what I'm talking about. So like this is a setup that's kind of building out along an anchor, and it's created the anchor in the beginning. This is a really easy way to trade if you can identify it pretty early, you know? Like we identified that it might do that. We suggested that it might do that. Did I mark it off and do all this other stuff? No, not really, you know? But did it work? Yeah, I mean, it works. It does create a pretty solid setup. And we've seen this on AMC half a dozen times now. So it's definitely something worth kind of cataloging in your brain, or just making like a note about. Just remember that when it generates that preliminary support, if you start seeing that volatility hike, then you might think to yourself, okay, you know, where are we trying to go here? Why are we bringing it up here if we're not ready to go yet? You know? And so some people are going to look at it and they're going to say, oh, it looks really good. You know, it's going to break out and all this stuff. It did make a higher high, but before it did that, it made repeated lower lows. So to me, it's like, I think it has to, at this point, prove that it's not going to go lower. And it could catch, you know, it could catch here and make a higher low at like 26.80 or even higher at like 27.70. But it hasn't yet proved that. So where would that be? Well, again, the reason that this diagram works so well is because it's tried and tested. You know, we've messed with it quite a bit. And I think that it's fairly straightforward here, because you can see that laid down here on that, it seems to be a bunch of parallel structures going down. I had this pink line earlier because I was thinking that might end up being the main one that we hit, but it seems to apply upward as well. I think it's pretty much the exact same angle to this breakout. So that ends up being the creek. So again, if it holds above this creek, then there's a good chance that it's not going to go obviously low, but you have a good chance of having what's called like an LPS, last point of support, in which case this doesn't break down again in a double flush. This idea that I had here, I think is still true. It would be this idea of like coming down and flushing through the bottom. And so if we were just to stop here and we did not advance, let's say to 29.90, which again, could it happen? Yeah, it could still happen. There could easily be like another wave right here that pushes up to 29.90. I'm not saying it's done yet, but it, you know, if it is done, then this doesn't go as low, you know, presumably. So it's possible that it doesn't quite get as low as 25.50, but maybe stops at like 25.80, which may make, again, sense. I think there was another trend down here that I had going up. Maybe it'll hit that instead. So there's a lot of really great targets here to the downside. What about upside? Well, the upside targets are different. The upside targets are this creek we left behind. It was a rising, ascending trend that we were on for a while. That to me is very, very important. I think it's probably the most significant. There's a second one that was even steeper that could be utilized later on, because if this is a wave and this is a rejection of that wave down, then you may actually come all the way back to the orange. And that's basically what I've got on the chart here. So I've got it coming back to this blue marker up here around 36. That would be breaching the top. So I'm assuming that that triangulates roughly with the top, because it usually does. See how that's the previous top here at 34.29? And then you look over and you see, oh, it would be pretty simple if you came back up to that blue marker to use that as an opportunity, perhaps, to advance, right, back to what would be called like an SOS, like back to a top, right? It has to first jump this lower creek, so we're not there yet. So first has to get over this lower creek area, and I think that's going to be around 31, probably. And that's why I'm not really, this white one was like an alternative path, but I had more consideration for this yellow path going down and then back up, because I think that we would approach that level with greater strength, but you never know, you know. I'm not the operator. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know which one is going to happen. I'm not positive. But this would make sense. This is a good triangulation as well, meaning the ascending pattern versus the sideways makes sense. So this is the area really of best buy-in. If you were going to talk about confirmation, it wouldn't be until about 35, which a lot of people would probably stick their nose up at, because they're like, well, we're really far from that. I'm not telling you how to trade. If you were really confident this was going to go back up, you're certainly welcome to trade however you want to trade. But if you're not sure, then you have to just kind of wait for confirmation. So the two areas that would happen would be here at 34 at the top here, 34 to 35. The other area would be maybe right here, passing above like 31 is what it looks like. And those would be good places to like consider taking a longer trade, because it's definitely confirming that you've broken out here on the bottom, which hasn't happened yet. It just hasn't. And then also that you're going to advance further, not just like kind of pump and dump. So holding this level, and then you've got a potentially really good trade, I think, all the way up to, again, potentially all the way up to about 50. That's a 45% move. So that's a big move. And that's, again, using just triangulation, just historic levels. We know that green level that I've got here, that green line is really, really important. Long term, it's the middle of that major uptrend. So it very likely comes up to here if it breaks out here. It's very, very quick, I think. It's going to move very fast when that happens. There's not a lot of trading that's happened in this area. You can see it's always been very distributive. The fact that we built out a little nest up top here around 31 is a big deal. We hadn't actually traded that area at all, really. This was all distribution, all sell-off last time. So we traded sideways, which is interesting, to say the least. So I think that platform around 31.50 has had more solid trading. It was tested 1-2 times. There's probably going to be a desire to go back up if they found sellers and stuff up there. So I think they'll push it. So when's a good time to get into GME? Well, I mean, the bottom at 26 was pretty good, but that's just because, you know, it dropped low. if you were waiting at this point, again, I wouldn't get in right this second personally. And just because I'm like, well, I would just wait until see what happens at 29, because if it comes up to 29 and then dumps back down, next week or whatever, you could still be in a bad situation going into the end of the month if you got in too early. If, on the other hand, it jumps up and over and it hits this 31 area, then you're like, all right. So at this point, it's like a few dollars away to the upside. You're not going to miss out that much percentage-wise on the move. It's 8%. It's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. So for me personally, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to, unless this came up to like the 30s, probably wouldn't buy in here where it's likely about to get overbought, and then maybe take a nosedive the other way and test. Again, that's the key word. It's not necessarily that has to come all the way down here, but it's going to test and see how far it can go. So it is possible that it holds higher, but that test hasn't happened, and that's really important. So just to recognize that, I think is significant. Yeah, and that's all I got for GME. So that was a quick 20-minute blurb on GME. I think it could potentially be a really good day for it. It's a Friday, so they're probably going to find a place to settle in and then just chill out for the day. Yeah, that's okay. We'll talk about Apple later in case anyone was trading it with me. I'm not particularly concerned about it. There does appear to be maybe a head and shoulder type setup here. It's possible, and I'll get more into that later. But I did a secondary swing trade yesterday overnight from here. Basically, I got in a little too early, right around 223.40. I left it because I was like, I think it's still going to turn. I don't know what this is. They went down to the 618 level, and then that was that. And I had posted those numbers in the Discord, in the alternative ticker channel, and really what I was just saying is like there were like three bottoms. One was here, one was here, one was here, and it went to the lowest one. Long term, if you're in Apple, this is a big creek jump on a couple levels. One, M shape right here, obviously crossing up and over and trying to hold that support. The other is like this downward channel. I'm not going to spend more time on it right now, but just so you can see that if you happen to be in it, and don't have those channels, you should probably mark it off, because that middle on this wave is significant, to say the least. So you want to kind of mark off that major downward widening that's happening, and into this bottom, because it should give you a sense of like, oh, we're right on the middle, and we were checking that middle multiple times on the bottom and on the top. So I'm not particularly worried about it. If it breaks this uptrend, maybe kind of worry about it a little more, but I'm still thinking it's going to go up and fill that gap before too long. At this point, you can't really get to the gap without leaving the channel, so it'll be an interesting conversation. But about a week out till earnings, so a lot could happen. All right, so AMC. So this is my daily chart on AMC. Still haven't broken out of the downward channel. So, you can throw caution to the wind at times and make assertions about upside or whatever. And I'm not against people being bullish at all, but I was trying to tell folks that were really bullish last week, the week of the 16th, that this isn't really necessarily over. You have a lot of possible places that this could stop still. And much like what we were talking about on GME, I don't think this reaction's necessarily happened yet. So this initial drop down, right, to create this mid-level around 4, like I don't think this is over, I just don't think this reaction has happened yet. So if that's the case, then are we just kind of generating like a bottom right now? Well, yeah, I mean, it's much the same. Where did you create a support here? And it's probably near impossible to see it at this point, but yeah, I mean, there's a possibility off this bottom. I can't really see on the daily, to be honest. I'd have to look closer. But there's a possibility at this point you've already hit the bottom. There's also a possibility that you're just starting to really make that center mark, and the bottom might be like 313 or something like that. And I think we had talked about 313 before. There was a early sign of weakness here that points that direction. So it certainly is a possibility. 330 seemed like a more likely place to stop because of the fib retracement and some other things. Like there's this middle, as you can see here on this wraparound. And I'm like, if this holds, I don't see why you'd go low right this second. It doesn't make any sense. But overall, if we think that it comes back up to the middle, did this go far enough? Sure. The second leg of that S-curve would be presumed done. I might even go from that gap, so a little bit higher even. And you would say, oh yeah, the second leg is basically finished going down. But the reaction hasn't happened, right? So on the breakout, I think this is where you're going to have that nice layup value. And again, there should be some kind of a parallel that's met. It's not always like perfect. Usually it's pretty close to what you see on the bottom. So if it's legit and works out, we should have some kind of a parallel here that we can use also. You see this goes pretty far. So this could indicate, again, there's a desire maybe to take it down even lower, and we'll find out. But I would actually not worry too much about that right now, because this is good. It looks like if we held, we would break out, and that makes sense. Come back up to like 430. So we're getting a lot of continuity. So there's a lot going on here, right? And I think that when we were talking earlier about, and that goes to that gap level, weirdly. We were talking about like whether or not this was going to run, and I was saying, you just got to wait because there's confirmation that needs to happen. It hasn't happened yet. This is really what we're talking about, And if this is the bottom and it doesn't go any lower than this like 320 for now, then we might be expecting this to react back up to the 4s. Does that make sense? Yeah, there's a gap right there. Of course it makes sense. We just measured it. So I'm not looking at this like from the point of view of Stockfighter says going to 175. We can address that. Yeah. I'm not looking at this from the point of view of a bear per se, but I am saying that like there's a strong chance that it comes up to this marker anyways. Yeah. I mean, 175 is pretty low, and he's probably using what he's probably done is used a P&F here count to go down, and that P&F count usually is pretty accurate. But I will say this, that I don't think it goes below 226. I've already made the argument. Is it possible it goes below 226? Sure, it'd be in March. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I've got here is like you pump back up and then you would come back down potentially later on. But I don't personally think it goes down that low. The only thing I could say about that otherwise is that when you look back at what happened in 2020, there were probably likewise like a lot of considerations that this would go lower. Ultimately, this is where the gap is in 2020, right? And we found that was very consistent with what we had seen here in terms of these checks. So that the check back up here to like 430, 440, which I've been suggesting for several weeks now, is like the check here. Comes back to the bottom of the range, and it comes back to that interception of, it's essentially the exact same back test. So if that happens, I think it's just continuation of what we see in 2020 as like a bottom forming, So when you look at it from that point of view, this green marker, frankly, becomes a really good guide. And it's hard for me to argue it goes past 226. I made a case for it. I'm not going to make another case for it. I'm not going to argue with a P&F count either, because it is what it is. It's a target. but I don't think it's going to hit 170. So that's where I'm just going to leave it for now. So this is like old stuff. Oh, I don't remember what this is. I think it's just us doodling down here. So yeah, I think that 226 is a really solid target, and I have it out in March. So if you're wondering, like, is it the same timeline? Yeah, pretty much. This is a little bit older, I think, the way I drew this. I'm not sure. I can't remember when I drew this one. But I've got another chart that I was using. So I think that this is probable. Yeah. Like we had talked about only recently, we talked about recently the concept of coming out in January and like running up in January. And that was a very new development. And it really was something that came from the concept that this could be what I saw as like an early version of what happened in December of 2020. But later just kind of felt like maybe I misjudged that because there's no leaving of the range here. Like it stayed inside the range. And that really bugs me because it should have dropped the range here if it was going to be that low in that reaction. This doesn't accomplish the same things that move in December of 2020 accomplished. The November, December. It just doesn't do that. I mean, it just doesn't. And then the missing piece of like, hey, we don't have an upthrust over here for whatever reason, we don't have that move here. I don't know why we don't have it here. We just don't. And then later it happens again. So it's like, man, excuse me. So they obviously had, as operators, had enough ammunition to take it down low, then enough sellers to start sell off, and then only needed to make it really volatile here to bring it back up. Yeah, they head faked. I don't know if there was a plan to take it back up here or if that was just, again, somebody changing their mind because of the dilution. I don't know. It's a speculative thing, right? And everybody's going to have different answers. But I think that on the whole, I've been fairly consistent about this idea that, maybe we get a pump up here to the 8s or something, but then we're going to come back down. And that's the argument that I've been making since a while. I mean, for a while. I don't know exactly when it started, but it's been a while, maybe even like a year, because I did a video in January talking about coming down and bouncing out on the bottom. I mean, I don't know where it is. I could go find it, I guess. But that chart was real low. It came into the 2s, and it was a big wave down. And so there's not really a lot about this that's particularly new. The one thing that actually is new was this idea that maybe we could run in January. That was like the new idea. And I still think it's a possibility, but I don't know if I'm still not there yet. You can hear it in my voice. I have yet to commit to it really. The implications are there. I could find reason to do it. I found plenty of targets there in January into mid-February. It's there. But just like anything else, I'd be just as concerned that that's a pivot to the downside or something. And yeah. But I'm not arguing with anybody at this point. I'm just talking. I think that if you've been around for a while in this particular stream, you know my position about the possibility coming down. This has been in like almost all my charts for the last year. So I'm not particularly worried about it. My longer positions already got wrecked earlier anyways. So like I got out of some of them here, but once a card's coming down, it's like, well, that's that. I'm not going to sit there and pretend it's going to go up in January necessarily, and even if it did, I'd probably assume it wouldn't do it till after options expire in January. So it's like, that's it. You know what I mean? Like that was a big nail in the coffin here back in December. So that bled through those creeks. It was like, yeah, it's probably going to go low. We have chances, but no, it didn't take those chances. None of it worked out in the bullish patterns that we're accustomed to. And therefore we just keep going down. So right now, I think we're probably forming a bit of a, a bottoming action, but this would be akin to what happened in 2020 at the end of that year. This would be probably more related to that than anything else. So you can get this breakout, and run up pretty fast, and then kind of chop and do the same thing and then do it again, and then at that point, really just kind of waiting to see what happens, because if it breaks down to the side, it loses this trend, which it now didn't have a trend before. So now we've got one, right? So let's just say it didn't go lower and this is the trend. This could easily become like the general motif right here that I'm drawing, is like get a big up thrust on a Monday and then sink the rest of the week, and then get a big up thrust on a Monday and then sink the rest of the week, right? And then before you know it, you're kind of testing the boundaries here, and you've got potential distribution in action here, and you're basically working on the precipice that this isn't going to go down, but really don't know. This is all being traded distributively if it does these up thrusts. And that's very similar to what happened in 2020, where there was a push up back to the previous top, but it's a distributive push. The first is a push to this ledge, the second is a push to the floor, and then the final is like whether or not you actually get over that hump. And I think that where people that are hoping for a run, this is where confirmation is. This is where you have to be like, oh yeah, it's way up here. There's no confirmation till then. This is really where that creek jump, if you can tell, I mean, my chart's not the cleanest, I know, but this is really where that happens. You can see the intersection here. I'll try to make it a little bit more obvious. This is that long-term mid-trend, and this is ultimately where if it breaks out, it's going to come above this. And so it has to be up here. It has to make the leap. It's going to coincide with a leap over a lot of these other trends and ice levels and yada, yada, yada. Like there's another one right there. Like all of that stuff would coincide, right? It'd have to be way up here in order to go. This would be a confirmation potentially of going. So is that likely going to happen? I don't know. I mean, it could, but right now, like, what are you going to do? You can't do anything. You're way down here. If you just want to play like short term, is it safe to get in here and try to trade it up to like the 430 area? Personally, I'm saying yes. Does it necessarily have to go that high? No, we could technically stop around like 390. I think I've said that a couple times. Like this first floor could end up being a problem. But, from like 340 to 390 could be a good trade. I'm pretty confident it's going to at least do that. And then from there, I'm like a little bit less confident, but I'm still pretty confident that it's going to go up to the next area. I think it's going to try to push towards the 440s. And then after that, I'm really not confident at all about anything. I feel that there's a strong chance this is going to auto-react back up to the top, that we're going to go back up to test this area. If it's successful in bringing on the sellers again, we'll probably see that there's a huge ramp in on-balance volume here. And then they're going to dump it and flush it really hard and try to get all the way back down to the bottom, And it looks like, yeah, March, I've kind of like got it off to the side here, but it'd be like down here. And so you'd be looking at like an April, potential exit. Very similar to what we saw here, April into May, probably. Though it may not trade as long. It's hard to say. It may trade down here a little bit more than it did previously. That would make sense. But then I think it would just kind of take off and go. So, yeah. And that to me is enough time. So just to counter like the idea that it goes really low, if you were to count this as a PNF for the downside, okay, So what you're basically saying is that all of this is ammunition just to go down. But if you go back and you look at 2020, that would be like saying everything that's happened here, right, was just to get you down low. And I would suggest, yeah, it's that up thrust motion to sell down low. But then you would zoom out and you'd say, well, I'd still use the P&F count for this whole area to go up. Not just this last little bottom right here, right? But the whole. And that does give you an adequate point and figure count. So if there's an overlapping action here, like you can say whatever you want about this being really distributive. I agree. There's a lot of problems that happened, especially right around September 13th. And then shortly after that, August 12th. We got about halfway through here. You know, it didn't really do anything bullish, unfortunately, and started really looking more and more and more bearish as we moved along. But the overall picture here has been fairly consistent. I still think this would be, in my opinion, like a double bottom followed by like a squeeze motion. So if you're patient enough here and you're willing to wait it out and see what happens, you're not going to be throwing money at the at the wall or down the toilet here for this breakout. And you're not going to miss anything. It looks like you'd miss out on a lot going from like 350 to 450, but you're really not. Like if this move does happen and it's going to go pretty far, talking about like $16 to $20, then you're not missing anything, waiting $1 here. So I just feel like for now, AMC has been a bit of a bore because I don't personally think it's going to rocket, but I do think it comes up higher and then it's going to chill out and then probably come back down. And if it doesn't do that and it holds strong, the only other options I can see is, again, a takeoff right here, but we left a big gap behind. That's kind of a problem. Or maybe it doesn't come that low and only comes down to the gap. But my thought right now is that that gap is being used as a pivot point. So I think that the 226, again, where the gap is right here. I think it's being used as like a bit of a pivot for this motion that's going to come back down. So it's going to be like a halfway point where it hits that marker, chops for a minute, because of the reaction, and then continues. And that's why we're setting up above it to kind of define a floor in the future right here at 320. And this is why I wasn't particularly, excited about stopping before the gap. I was like, well, we don't get the gap. Yeah, I don't know, maybe April, May, I don't know. This could take a while. It's hard to say. Easy to look at 2020 and be like, oh, it just takes off. But in reality, it just depends on how this bottom is traded. And we're not there yet. We don't know. This could be an accumulation bottom that's more classical in nature. It could have a full, like Wyckoffean setup down here. And for that, we just would have to kind of wait it out and see what happens. So I'm not saying it's like necessarily going to do something bad or anything, but it could be very long-winded. So yeah, somewhere around May, and that's honestly, that's more in line with some of the earlier estimations that I had anyways, because we had looked at it early on, and when we were talking about it coming back down, we were talking about June, like May to June. I heard someone say a while back that, people always say they're saying, whoever they is, right? They're saying this, they're saying that. And I think what they're talking about is like generally the people that chart AMC, the proverbial they are, what I heard was they're saying we're not going to run till middle of the year, end of the year, blah, 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 blah now. And I'm like, well, they were the ones that were really talking about going up to $20 to begin with. I didn't think that for the longest time. I was very adamantly against the idea that it was just going to rocket to 20. After this initial push up here, it just didn't really seem like, especially after July, it didn't seem like that was likely. it quickly went from, I think it may go to 1380 at most, to I think it may go to 860 something at most. And it's been progressively getting lower and lower. And then I was like 560, and that unfortunately has ended up where it ended up being. But it's like that number didn't grow; it kind of shrank over time here as it progressed. So I feel like the proverbial they, like the people that were like already calling for 20s and stuff, I hope that you guys aren't as surprised by this, because we had talked about coming down way long time ago. Last summer, like there's a possibility this is an S curve and it comes down and it does this stuff, and maybe it pops first, and that's what I was hoping for. That's what I was betting on. It didn't work out. That's that. There's definitely error there, in terms of like what happened. But I hope you guys aren't overly surprised by this idea. And I think a lot of you all are pretty smart. You got into longer term stuff, like even into next year, like 2026. I think that's fine. I do agree that, yeah, you said 80. I don't think it goes nonstop there, but yeah, eventually, sure. This push, if and when it happens, and I think it will happen, I do think it's going to happen, and everybody's going to be like, whoa, like crazy. It's a lot like what happened in 2020. It does look like if it makes this move, that build out is very neat and organized, and if it makes that move, whether it's now or whether it's in May or whatever, it will jump the gap, or it will jump the creek. It's going to do that if it makes that move. So if that happens, then yeah, you're above the creek. We should see it back up to some degree and test and then reaccumulate. And if that happens, then you're in a better position to trade it forward. By the time it gets to the top, it's going to be closer to the end of the year or 2026. February 2026 has been my goalpost for a long time, and I've not moved it because it hasn't moved, because it's a macro goalpost out here, and it has to do with the big picture wave. And if I'm wrong about it, then whatever, but I don't think I am. I think it's going to be around that 2026 time, and I don't think that necessarily means it's not going to go high either. Even before then, it could be up at that time and be going sideways into February 2026. But by that time, it should be, up here somewhere. It may go a little earlier and then break down in February 2026. And 80 is a good estimation. If you're just trying to be safe, maybe that $40, $50 area. I'm still thinking it's going to go to this bottom right here, which is at least 68. And it oddly may end up being like close to the original all-time high number of like 72. I think that's just the nature of the shift value. So yeah, because I think this is ultimately like what we're doing here on AMC. So this would be like the first big kind of jump and push. The second big jump and push should be a little more, in theory, it could be a little more, I say should, but it really could be a little bit more vertical. We don't know though, that this isn't going to like kind of come back low and check real far or something. It could be a little different, than we experienced back here. This really held up very well. But there's other resistances here that may need to be tested. This could have a longer slide down and then break out again, we don't know. And it could change if this is an LPS. And you could have something more of like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it doesn't seem that likely. Long time ago, a guy named Riley would comment, and he had said that he thought this was like an ABC type correction, not actually an impulse wave. I don't know about that, because the rest of this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but I think and you're like, well, the correction shouldn't have come higher than the top. Well, exactly. Like there's all kinds of little things like that. But when you look at these in channels and the channel markers that are there, I think it's fairly self-explanatory, where these things might be. So I'm not super concerned about all this. just yet. But yeah, if I were if I were getting long-term stuff, I'd go past January 2026. So yeah, short term, I think that we're looking at 440. We may come as low as 313 and make like a sign of weakness right now, but I think it's more reasonable to think we probably stop short of that. We may be generating right now like an upward channel. I think we're going to do a series of push-ups to about 440. And then we're going to hold on and see what happens after that. I don't know, Dave. Last time he did stuff was back here, and it was just a series of up thrusts. So, be careful putting too much emphasis on like a person posting on, X or whatever. Yeah, so maybe Monday we'll see a big push up. We'll come back down, and then I think it could be even the next Monday we'll see another push up. It could be a couple weeks of that, and then I think after that we're going to wait and see. But you already know, different setup in my opinion. Yeah. Well, obviously, Dave, you don't have like the chart in front of you, so it's hard because you're just kind of like talking about it, and I'm like able to visually show what I'm thinking. And so if you've got a different setup, you've got a different setup. I don't think it can go anywhere until here. So, well, you mean different setup because of the tweet thing? Yeah, never mind. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. If you guys don't follow the Discord group, you probably weren't following this, but I actually entered another trade back here around right under 4 on MPW because I think, again, it's going to trade up and test this area. We're really there. I mean, I have this little red marker. I'm not positive it goes significantly beyond this. So the trade itself might be about done. I don't know. Did it leave a gap down there too? It did. There's a tiny gap at 413. That's kind of a bummer. But, same deal. It's like this could be, in theory, like a Wyckoffean reaccumulation right here. I mean, you could have a top followed by a phase B. My concern is that I think this did come lower, which means it's a sign of weakness. It came lower than all the previous bottoms, all 3 right here. So I still don't necessarily think it is that. I guess you could theorize that it could be, and then you could have a spring here, which on the bigger picture is like a larger LPS that then breaks to the upside and goes. But just like AMC, I'm most concerned that what's happening is that we're actually going to generate some kind of a top here, and we're not going to advance beyond it. So short term, not particularly concerned about it. And I think it's like anything else. Like this April, May area seem really likely to me as potential bottom for MPW. And this was, I guess, the sign of weakness that was drawn out that I thought was most likely going to hit later. So I think this is where you would come back down to in the future and hit a new low just slightly below 292. Very similar to what happened in the 2020 setup for AMC. This could be a really massive squeeze play. But also like AMC, there's some danger in this because the waves themselves are a little more long-term on MPW. There's a difference in the way the setup is here. And it makes me kind of wonder if this has like a break in the middle or something different. Even putting this in the same spot gets you above that creek, that long-term downtrend. So even having like a chop zone here at the top looks very different than what you would expect if you're just expecting it to just run straight up. But it actually mirrors the other side, and it's in the right spot. Like it's above all the creeks that it needs to be above. So I would not be surprised if this has a bit of a longer route to getting to 10 or 11 bucks. But it's still long-term a potentially really good trade, especially if it comes low to like 290s. I'm going to be very, 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 very bullish about it if it's at the 290s again you're not going to ever hear me shut up about it. So, um, FOMC, 7 trading days post OPEX. Yeah. Just 1 second, hang on. All right, sorry about that. Just checking on something. Yeah, so like this to me is a really nice setup, but it definitely sort of feels different than the way AMC traveled going into that COVID drop. So who knows? I mean, it could be crazier than this, but I just think it's longer term. But anywho. So yeah, today, don't have a lot of expectations. Probably going to end the day around 350, 349, something like that. Monday, yes. Monday is different because if we ended it today at like 350, there's certainly, that's like right on the edge here of this creek. There's certainly a possibility that just goes Monday. I've kind of got this over to the side too far. This is like Wednesday. It's like over here. Monday the 27th, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday the 31st. Monday is like here. Yeah. There we go. So if it takes a longer time, that's what it would probably look like chopped. Yeah, so we've got nothing really exciting on AMC to particularly look forward to today. And same goes for GME. I think there's even a potential, again, that this comes low. How could you talk about AMC going up Monday, but GME is not going up? Well, right now, at least where this middle is, I'm positioning it right here. Look, they don't always run together in the way that you think they will run together. So just remember that. It is possible, yeah. I said like this could be a bottom on GME. It is very possible. If it makes that high or low, that this just takes off right here, right? And just goes, you know. So I mentioned that earlier, but maybe it wasn't super clear. Because I want to make sure that you're aware that that's what I'm saying when I say it has like a LPS. That means it makes a higher low. It's a possibility, right? And it could just take off here. It doesn't really make any difference because you'd still be waiting to see what happens. But if this occurred later, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Because you remember, like, sometimes they don't run together, but like the last, potentially, if this took like a week, 1 week, the last push up here would be February 3rd. And then depending on what happens here, a lot of times this is where we see, I feel, the AMC GME dynamic come into play is like one of them chops while the other one kind of moves and then they switch. And they typically move together most often when you're talking about like a major move up or major move down. But like this period for AMC and GME are pretty different. We're almost like trading out. So it wouldn't surprise me if GME is a little more choppy and low going into February and AMC's kind of moving. And then as February begins, this is where you see the February 3rd right here. This is February 3rd right there. Like that's where it really kind of pumps and goes. And then as GME is running all the way back up to wherever it's going to go, AMC is chopping and going sideways here until mid-February. That would totally make sense to me. That may not be what a lot of people are expecting, but that would totally make sense to me. So, yeah, that's my opinion about it. But yeah, I was talking about MPW for just a minute. So this is a notorious chart because while I've had some really great calls, like this push, it's yet to make that kind of bigger move. And so it's been a bit of a mixed bag. We'll talk about WTO in a minute. I saw your comment, Goblin Slayer. I'll check it out. Like everything else, I think this is a back test on these ascending markers here. I know that I've got a lot of lines, but really the middle is right here around 460, and that's where we're at right now. That's like the middle of that S curve coming down. So this is like a 50% retracement. So for now, even if it went all the way up to like 560, I'd still be hesitant to say it's definitely going or something like that. You know, it needs to kind of show that it's going to hold this support. I'm very doubtful that it does that. So I'm just going to be like straightforward and say like, I don't think it's necessarily going to hold that support. The issue with this is not that it doesn't have potential. The issue is that I think there's a huge amount of shorts for one, and there's a huge amount of investor, institutional investment interest in it. This has a massive institutional following. Even compared to other stocks that we look at, this is a hugely attractive one for large operators because it has a massive short interest. It's consistently over 30%. At one point, it was like 50% short interest back here. I mean, it's just crazy. But then you look at the institutional ownership, and it's like rocketing for the most part. There's some people that got out, but it's like very small positions. Your larger positions like Vanguard have like 100 million shares. So I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned that they have plenty of motive to, as they hike the on balance, to then dump it again and see if they can flush some folks out. And I have a very strong sense of continuity here with what happened in 2021. Like it's essentially the exact same chart in most regards. So if it holds and it breaks out here, different story. Maybe this was a spring. Maybe it's taken off already. You know, we'll know when it gets up top, up in this area. And if not, I kind of expect to do the same thing as I'm talking about with AMC's come back down going into March or April. So, yeah. Is swap a ticker? Or are you talking about swaps? Swaps. I don't have any real opinions about it. I have knowledge of it, but I don't have enough knowledge to form a really strong opinion about it. I appreciate that you asked me, but I'm like not able to give you a good answer. So my knowledge is not infinite. So like when other people explain what's happening with swaps, then I tend to kind of follow along pretty well. But if you ask me to like formulate my own hypothesis or, you know, whatever, then I just wouldn't be able to do it. Really quick, I said I would talk about a little bit about Apple. So this has been my big trade this week. So I entered way back here, and I think at peak up here at the top on Thursday, which was yesterday, it hit 60% on some of those calls. I didn't exit, but I did exit one, or I should say a couple of my positions because I was looking at percentage positions. So what I did is I exited about a third of my positions here. And the reason that I did that was because I was like, it's popped up really far. It got really overbought on some smaller time frames. And I'm like, I don't think it's going to, in my mind, I'm like, I don't think it's going to keep going right this second. It's reached a lot of resistances, so on and so forth. Things you can't see even. So this one you can't see, but in extended hours, there's a marker right here. And when you use that in combination with the regular trading hours channel, it's like, yeah, there's definitely an issue of passing through this area around 226. So yesterday what I did is I waited to see what was going to happen here on the backup. So the top of the first wave, it's a misleading kind of setup because the top of the first wave, if you use regular trading hours, is not actually this second peak here at 223. It's actually a little earlier. It's still at 223, but it's like this peak happened before this drop. So that would be like wave 1. So 3 would be from 219 up to the top. And when I looked at that, I'm like, it would have to not come back below 223.06. And it did yesterday. So the whole day I'm kind of sitting there watching thinking, well, it can't come back below here. And I was considering buying in here. So what I did is I re-entered the same exact contracts. So just so you can kind of see how I traded it. And I was like, the confirmation of this is actually above. It's actually up here at 224. It would need to break out and come above the previous top. But I was feeling like really confident for a number of reasons that I won't get into, that it was going to go. And there's another one of those things where it's like, well, Booksy, you've been doing really well, but you don't seem to be, posting losses. Well, I didn't post a loss, but I did get in too early. And I got in too early and it just then sank. I was really in over here. It came across this early creek and I thought, there's a good opportunity here to like kind of get in right there. And I don't think it's going to go lower. I think it might form an Elliott wave impulse and then do a wave 5, which would lead you, by the way, up to this 228 area. So I was like, it's perfect. It's got the good setup. It's going to like break out here and go back up. Maybe it chops today or tomorrow. But as the day progressed, I was like, and I had posted it. I said there were 618 levels lower. Technically, long term, this has like a middle downtrend that you can see. And it may break down. I mean, frankly, the way this looks right now, it may actually be like a double up thrust that comes low and breaks low. It's very possible. So you got to keep in mind, like, it's never a sure thing, right? Even though there's a gap here, even though I think on the macro, this looks pretty bullish. We talked about the hourly and the 4-hour and the daily, and there's a lot of divergences going on into this bottom. There's heavy volume. Everything about it to me would be like, yeah, this is a good place to kind of like hold it, at least come back up to this. I think it's a strong chance of reaction. I feel the same way now. Nothing's really changed, except that the only thing that really changed was that on the daily, I think it was the RSI, it was oversold and then it wasn't. And it was like this one day at the beginning of the week where it had pushed down into oversold territory on Tuesday, but then it closed high. And so it didn't actually become oversold. And that bugged me. But like the MFI came to being oversold. And RSI... an MFI on the 4-hour had already been divergent. RSI had been kind of chopping, and it did get further oversold. So I'm like, it's kind of a mixed bag. I still feel like there was a strong chance that this isn't just like a dead cat and it wasn't going to like bounce and then flop down. I thought, well, probably still going to come up and hit that gap, and you're going into an earnings. It would surprise me to not see Apple remotely go up into earnings at all. Usually it props up before then, even if it's going to drop. So I feel still that this is a fairly good chance that this is going to come up into that 228 area by about earnings. So I had like posted month out 230 calls or whatever. It's possible depending on how this setup goes, that this even goes all the way up to like near 240. I think 235 is even possible here. But I had received some interesting feedback from folks in the chat, and I agreed that there is a possibility here, and I think it's a real one, that Apple could come down first and actually hit a new low before going up, especially if the end goal here might be to distribute after earnings. You could see it sell down, and it did do it in that extended hours a little bit. That's what I've got right here. You could see it come down to like 217 or something like that. And someone else mentioned there's a gap at like 216. I'm like, yeah. So what am I doing then, trading this? Am I just like holding on for dear life or what? Well, I mean, at this point, I think it's fairly safe to say that a lot of these intersections are still pointing pretty low. But these are like 786 retraces down here at like 221. Technically, there's another trend. I've got it kind of smaller. It's just like dotted line. There's a lower trend down here that I could catch. So there's still a lot here that hasn't really said, this is definitely breaking down. So what I did is I entered this play, and then first thing this morning, I exited again, but only from that second position because I bought this at a higher price. So it dropped maybe like 15% or something into the end of the day. It was down. And then I'm like, yeah, I still think it's going to go up. Max pain's up here at like 225. I was anticipating at this point, if you're wondering why I entered this trade, I was anticipating a reaction back to this spot here, not higher. So did that happen? Well, yeah. Did it happen the way I thought it was going to happen? No. So I think I was thinking about it too, and I'm like, Thursdays often are like this, where you see this kind of, I think what it honestly is, I think there's a desire to kind of shake out contracts. I mean, it makes sense to me if you're trying to avoid, especially option sellers, if you're trying to avoid paying on certain contracts, you can have some volatility on a Thursday that takes out one side or the other, whether it's longs or puts, and just causes people to like doubt it and get out of positions or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case, but it does seem like Thursdays a lot of times are these kind of grumbly days. So I was thinking maybe that's the reason why it chose to come low. And then also that long-term trend, it hadn't met it on this downward push, and it did meet it on the second drop. So I think that was another big part of it. So right now, I don't particularly find this to be very strong looking. I think that Apple looks to me like it has another kind of sign of weakness right here, the weird dotted line thing. And so I think there's a possibility this comes down again. You might say, well, your original entry is pretty close now at this point. You already like missed out on all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, I missed out on a 60% run up here, technically. I didn't miss out on all of it because I traded out of it. And then again, I traded that this morning. So it's like I had some good trades here. I exited that same 1/3 again here, and it was a positive 24% gain. So just in case you're wondering, like, did you lose money on that because you entered too early? No. But I made a risky decision to hold it, not knowing for sure what was going to happen. And obviously this is very end of the day. This was like the last 10 minutes of the day. So you just never really know. I just had a really strong conviction that this was going to make that reaction back up for a number of reasons, right? And I'm not going to go into all those right now because it's in the past, but it's essentially like for wave purposes, it would need to come back up and check this again. And it did. So now, does it look like it's going to continue? Well, not so much. It doesn't look the greatest. Like I said, there's a little bit of a sign of weakness here because this did dip low. I think potentially beneath that trend even. Arguably, you could say, well, if that's the case and that is an uptrend, then maybe this is where it should be, in which case it's not actually broken it. Yeah, maybe, I don't think it's a huge deal unless it comes below the bottom anyways. So I'd be looking at 222 regardless, roughly that 222.10 area. And if it dumped through there, yeah, I'd be a bit concerned. But again, max pain on Apple is at 225. So what seemed more likely to me was that this was going to generate probably some kind of a wraparound here going into Monday. This is a long day ahead, right? But maybe in the day around 224 or 223.99 or something like that, you know. I don't necessarily think it's going to sit at 225. If something else happens, something else happens. So for now, I'm not doing anything. I'm just kind of chilling on it. This looks like an upthrust. You know, somebody's selling off, pumping it up, selling it all the way back down. Same thing with this. It pumped all the way up, sold it all the way back down. So it's not looking particularly bullish right now from that point of view. This was fairly bullish. This sell down and then push back up. Just kind of a lot of volatility here, shaking out a lot of people, I think, before earnings. So I'm still thinking this is going to go up, but I'm thinking that this could be a distributive style rise, that we're actually going to see a lot of distribution going up, and then afterwards potentially sell back down again. So anyways, current target 230, maybe as high as 237. And I'm holding my positions for now. I mean, they're a month out. I'm not really worried about them losing a lot of value. And as long as I see this as a very strong potential, unless something happens that makes me think that that's not possible, I'm probably just going to hold them. So, yeah. So now you know what I was doing yesterday. If you saw that post, I doubt a lot of you did, but if you saw that post, then you'll know that's what I was doing. I wasn't feeling good yesterday, so I didn't stream. I would have streamed it. But you would have just heard me grumbling about whether this was going to go down or whatever. So I think this potential setup was an easy one to trade here, 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 and then here. So good trades, right? So the first one was like, this is going to sound weird, but I think I actually entered twice because I had an early entry here, and I think I entered again here. So, or like maybe up here or something. I can't remember. So there was like a second contract that I had, or a series of contracts that I had. I keep saying one, but whatever. We could just pretend, whatever. So there was a series. I'd bought some here, some contracts here that were slightly higher. They were like 30 cents higher or something like that. Because I was like, it's consolidating. I think it's going to break out and go. So those are the ones I actually exited. And then when I entered again, I almost got in for the same price that I did down here as they were elevated. So I ended up kind of trading the same contract twice, almost from the same price. So this looks like a head and shoulder on the RSI on the 10-minute. It probably is, but it doesn't really mean much to me on RSI. That would just imply that this whole thing could be like a head and shoulder. But the neckline would be really low. It'd have to be down here at like 219. Or maybe this guy, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. Well, I'd say this. I guess if it breaks that neckline, probably going to come back down to 220, 21. So I might need to get out before then. So I don't want to take like a big L on this. I'll just re-enter if that happens. No harm, no foul, right? It may stink to see like, oh, it peaked and you didn't get out, but in reality, as long as you don't lose money, you're fine. There's always another day, you know? You live to fight another day, right? The liquidity is yours. It's there. You still have it. I would be surprised if it did this today. Again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me unless, I don't know. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to me that this goes down first, like way down first. It would make more sense that this goes up here, then goes down. But I don't know. Again, it's like, you look at these things, and what I get stuck with, you guys maybe you feel the same way, is I'm like, one thing that really bugged me about Apple was this MACD is like super, I guess it shouldn't bug me, but but it's like super irrelevant at times and then super, super accurate at other times. And it really bugs me because I was like watching it yesterday on the small time frames. I was really surprised at how quickly, like this, for example, right here. You see this little marker? So this was a really early signal on the 6 minute that this was going to come back down. And then again, the same thing happened here. It got over the top on the MACD, and again it comes back down and it retraces, and then it turns back up, and you're like, okay, it's going to go again. What's interesting about this is if you look at the RSI, it's like there's no indication that this is overbought. Like at this point, you could say maybe it's going to distribute. It looks like a 1, 2, 3, 4 push up right on a caddy or something like that. But you'd have to be looking at like the micro level. And then MFI, it actually looks divergent. It's like keeps going up, right, as this price is coming down, which is part of the reason why I held yesterday as it was going down. Was like, well, there's still a lot of people like buying in. I think it's going to reverse. It hasn't yet made that mark. It's going to be some kind of a pop to get it. But it's just weird how like the MACD was a front runner in this case, almost a better indication. In this particular situation, a better indication of that it wasn't actually going to go. Unfortunately, like I said, it's almost like irrelevant because if you look back here, the same thing happened on this breakout, and then it just sort of like ignores it. This is divergent all the way to the top. It's a really strange, I mean, that's just strange. It's strange how like opposite it is at times to RSI. Maybe that's a good thing because you can have something to like work with, but I'm just not used to the Apple chart. So I was like not sure what to make of that, and I was like, I don't really know what to make of that, you know. Now I know, you know, so I'm starting to see like a better relationship between these two. And so during a downtrend, if this becomes very high on the MACD, then and the RSI is still kind of in a downward cycle, it's probably a good idea to see that as a signal of a top. Whereas during an uptrend, if this becomes very high, but the RSI is like breaking out, I don't think you can use it as a signal necessarily to sell anything. It's more of a signal of like consolidation before a move. So I find it to be a strange indicator for Apple. I don't know, it's just different than what I'm used to, I guess. Maybe I just don't use it enough overall, but yeah, I mean, it looks like a head and shoulder here, so we'll see. If it does come down again, I'd be kind of surprised to see it drop all the way down here to 220. I would be more inclined to think it somehow holds this trend for now. I guess we'll find out pretty soon. This is like a mini head and shoulder here. It's different than the other one. This is a larger version of that. I don't know. I don't know if you can count it like that. I guess you could. Technically, this does test the same liquid area right here. So, head and shoulders are fun, but they are kind of complex at times. I think the neckline would have to be pretty low. Like you'd have to use this and this. Hang on, one of my cats is like clawing at something. Hold on just a second. All right, I'm back. As soon as my wife left, my cat started trying to get into my son's room, and they were clawing at the door. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. So, nope. No siree, Bob. Yeah, so we have a minute until it gets there. All right, we'll check out some other stuff. I said I wasn't going to talk about Apple too much, but I'm talking about it a lot. I just thought it was a good trade this week, and it's been pretty good. I mean, I've made money on it. I'm not like unhappy with it. The longer positions that I got back here may not do very well if this sinks. So I'm just trying to think about what I want to do there. And yeah, we'll see. How low did this go? Did it actually hit that neckline? Oh, shoot. It did. It's like right on the line, too. Yeah, so we were checking it out. And then this is just a trend. I don't know if it's the trend. Let's see. Another thing I've noticed about some of these higher liquidity stocks is they're a little bit more consistent, and sometimes with their lines, they like really precise markers. Like look at that. It's like right at the dot, right at there. I mean, it's really close. You know, like the nature of it doesn't seem very disguised. But then again, I also really worried, and I told you guys about this, I was really worried about that extended hours. I still think that's a problem because they use that extended hours target here, and you don't see it on regular trading hours. So it bugs me quite a bit. I'm an animation expert. It's true, I like animation. So the tweet is from the dog. That's a really sad. That's like one of the saddest. I mean, it's one of the saddest things ever, and even in beyond animation, it's just one of those TV moments. So Seymour is obviously. The joke is Seymour ass, right? Like so people are talking about Mo ass, Mo ass, or whatever. That particular moment, we're not the same age, but like we're kind of close in generational terms. So he would have seen that when it first came out. Maybe he's a little younger than me, I think. I remember watching it when it first came out or whatever. So in Futurama, the dog is a dog that he left behind. If you don't know the premise of Futurama, it's about him going to the future, right? And it's crazy. And yeah, so that's what the dog is doing, is the dog is waiting for his owner to come back. So there's like this dog that, you know, was his dog basically, but it's that classic, like the dog never stops waiting, you know, for their owner to return. So the particular tweet is the dog being really old. It's not when the dog was I think it's when the dog's older and still waiting basically for Fry, who's the main character, to come back. And eventually the dog passes away, and that's why it's really sad, because it's like, oh, you know, his dog waited for him. He doesn't know exactly what happened to the dog, I think, but it does show it at the end or whatever. I personally, I'm with you, Reese. I don't take a lot into the dates. I think the dates are kind of irrelevant. I don't necessarily think the name matters that much. I think it's really just about, he'll keep waiting even if everyone else is losing interest. Yeah, I think that's kind of the bigger, easier theme. He's a loyal dog that's waiting for something to happen. So, you know, I don't waiting for that moment when his owner comes back and he's like, so I don't see it as like a negative per se, but I don't see it as like it feels very neutral to me. Like, yeah, I mean, if he's waiting till he's an ancient guy, sure, that's sad. And that's how some people see it, is like gonna wait forever till you die. But I think that might be the idea. Is like he's like, no, I'll just keep. I'm gonna stay in it till I die, kind of thing. That's the level of conviction he has. And the other thing about things like tweets and junk is that people, like, we don't know what people are responding to. Like, sometimes people assume that he's like spending a really long time crafting every tweet and this and that. He might be, but like, when I think about things and you guys think about things, like, what are you thinking about, before you make that comment? Or what are you thinking about before you post something? Like, you'd never know. It could have been a response to people on his previous comments saying, like, oh, this is never going to happen or whatever. And he's just telling them, I don't really care what you think. I'm going to wait because I'm loyal and I'm going to do this, right? It could be in response to other things. Like, I don't know. There's just so many things that could be going on in a person's head. And I think there's an assumption that this guy is some prophet who knows exactly what's going to happen all the time. And I'm like, yeah, he definitely seems to have some pretty intrinsic insider knowledge. He worked he worked in that industry before he did the GameStop saga. I mean, that was his job. So, like, I get, like, that he has some kind of knowledge. Obviously, he foresaw this great movement. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. Like, would it have even happened if he didn't, foresee it? I don't know. These are silly questions in the end. Doesn't really make any difference. So he's become a kind of a prophetic figure in this space. But, guys, if a prophet scratches his nose, it could just be because his nose itches, And it turns into like this ridiculous game of let's just analyze every single thing. Anything he says or does publicly has to now be scrutinized. I think that's a bit silly. Like, is he not allowed to have just like a joke? Does it have to mean something? Is he not allowed to post something that... It's the same thing with Adam Aaron back in the day. He would post stuff and people were like doing all this weird stuff. They're like, look, I found a face in Batman's armpit and that face is grinning and it's pointing towards this other thing and this other thing looks like 24 dots. It must mean 24 days until... It's like, dude, there's a big difference between like a sleuth and somebody who's just obsessed and looking for some kind of validation for a position that they're in. It's like, you're in that position, you either have conviction or you don't. I think that'd be a much better way of viewing that tweet personally. It's like, is a sense of conviction about what could happen. If that's the rally cry, then I'm like all for it. Yeah, you should have conviction in your trades. That's good. Honestly, if he's actually posting something with a bunch of weird cryptic messages, I think it's either a farce, like he's doing it to poke fun at institutions who'd probably look at it the same way. I don't think he's been compromised. I think the institutional interest has changed. There was a Wall Street Journal article. There's a guy who went around who interviewed after all this stuff happened, and he was doing statistics, and he said something like 85% of hedge funds are now paying attention to social media trends and social media sites, and specifically things like Reddit, after GameStop happened. So the idea that like they're not sitting there, they're human beings that work for these organizations, y'all. They could easily create an account and go on Reddit and just read stuff. They don't even have to participate. How many eyes are on that at any given point? Dozens. It's like, there's really no mystery. To me, it's like, I'm like, yeah, they're just watching. He knows that. He thought it was funny he was brought back to sell back into retail again. I think that he was not, I don't think he was complicit. I think he was very self-aware, but I think everybody else wasn't aware what was going on. He was joking about it, saying, uh-oh, I said something, the price is moving, whoa. He was joking about how, like, manipulation is pinned on people on the whims of every word. Like, oh, if I say something wrong, the stock's going to move the wrong way. It'd be like me sitting here being like, Apple's garbage, and then watching it drop 3 cents and be like, oh, that was me, ha ha ha. He's joking about that because he doesn't honestly believe that the market tends to move on his every word. He believes that it's manipulated by bigger money. Therefore, if it's moving like that, it's probably because bigger money is dumping it, selling into the news that he's streaming live or whatever, right? And I think that, to me, resonates more as a truth than him actually being complicit in. So he was joking about it, and that kind of irritated me because I was like, dude, you're being like referential. He's self-aware. I appreciate that, but you realize that like a lot of the people that follow you are not. There's plenty of people that understand it, and then there's a ton of people that just don't get it. They genuinely think that you're manipulating the market or that you have that kind of power. I don't think they get it. So he's essentially like, again, a product of his generation. I hate to say it, but the millennial and up generation tends to be a lot less sincere. We don't value sincerity as much. We tend to be very cynical, and that's just kind of the way of the world now. Like, everything has a punchline, right? There's nothing sincere. So I hate to say it, but I think he's often in that same mindset where it's like the joke goes on, kind of. That's what I feel. I could be wrong. I'm not some kind of like psychoanalyst here. I'm not trying to like tell you what this guy thinks. I don't know exactly what he thinks. I'm just saying, like, it would make sense to me if that was his actual state of mind about it, and that this idea of him like waiting around isn't necessarily a negative thing. It's just him saying, at the end of the day, I'm still waiting. You haven't made me leave, yada, yada, yada. I see it more as like that kind of a rally cry as opposed to, here's something you should tear apart with sticky notes and project boards. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, I personally am just kind of like, if he's genuinely trying to tweet stuff that's like cryptic and all this stuff, it's got to be, at this point, he has to know that it's ridiculous. So I almost feel like there's nothing really of value to what he says as a result. Because it's like, well, he's probably just poking fun at, in my mind, I think he's just poking fun at institutions at this point and people that are conspiracy theorists. Like, I genuinely don't think he is genuine at this point. I think the only thing he's genuine about is, and I think that's why this tweet maybe is being misread, because in some ways it should have been read as, this is probably the only thing genuine he can provide at this point, is just him saying, I'm still here. I'm still holding my positions. That is about the most sincere he's going to be. And he's done it, frankly, he's done it to himself, and he probably doesn't even care. He would probably say, well, it's just a product because I'm a public figure. Now I'm a product of your imaginations. I think that he's aware of that. He's made out to be whatever he's made out to be. So what can he do? Anything he says, like I said, he scratches his nose and people are like, ooh, it means something. It's like, no, he just had an itchy nose, Maybe he's just thinking about something and he's just talking about it. He's just a person. And so, like, my thing with him is like, I had friends like that in high school where it was like, they were just never, almost never taken serious. Like, they would never take anything seriously. And pretty much everything that came out of their mouth was a joke or meant to be a joke. And it's like, that's fun, but at the end of the day, like it's not like they're not my friends. They're still my friends. But at the end of the day, like that's not who they are. Like I actually got to know people, and you were like, yeah, that's just part of a personality thing. That's just them being them. But like that doesn't define who they are and what they actually believe about things. It was just very superficial. So, anywho, I talked about AMC a lot this morning, Reese. I'm not going to go back through it all, but I think it's pretty straightforward. I still think we're going to come back up to the fours area, 390 up to 440 maybe, and then I think we'll probably come back down. But it's a mixed bag of. I don't think we're going to come down now and fill the gap. If we did, I'd actually maybe be a little bit more bullish, but I think it's the same problem where you still have that issue of like you haven't back tested this area. So you still have to back test this 390 to 4 area. Until that happens, there's not really much else to say. I think the next battle is going to be up here. This little white pocket that I just drew. I'm pretty confident about that. I would genuinely be surprised if it doesn't come to that in the next couple weeks. So, yeah. But in terms of the setup as it is, I think that we're likely not going to keep getting more and more and more oversold at this point. I think there's a decent chance that we're going to build out and probably maybe next week break out and start working our way back out and up. And then we'll see what happens when we get to this next kind of battle zone, so to speak. Yeah. I'm trying to decide what I want to do here with Apple, but I need to respect folks that wanted me to look at other things. So I think what I'll do is set an alert. This is not looking very good. To me, this reminds me of like the cat ear setup. It's kind of pushed up, created a support here, and then it's retesting. It's not looking like it's breaking out. And so it looks a lot like the middle of a cat ear formation, which would be like a paw and then ear 1, ear 2. But that is the same thing that happened on this side. And ultimately, like, this is a head and shoulder into a bottom. So it may not come to fruition that it fulfills. Kind of just too simple. I don't know. Like it could. So I don't know. It's a tough one. It may already be there, to be very frank. Yeah, it may already be there, like walking down. And then larger picture, I think that's another question of like, is there another one here, here, and here? It could be. If all that stuff happens and it just kind of capitulates down, I think you're going to end up pretty low before you know it. I think you'd probably end up in this 218 region before too long. So, I wonder if Max Payne's changed at all, though. Kind of makes me wonder why you would go really, really low. Unless people just really want their puts in the money. Some folks were not happy that it was this high, but the fact that it's up here at 225 says something. This doesn't surprise me at all that it popped up there this morning. The rest of the day, I would have expected to go more sideways. I don't know. All right. Let's look away, Booksy. Man, I don't know, man. NU, basically where we said it was going to be. It actually looks like it's trying to break out, but at the end of the day, like, this was kind of the last target I had in mind, was right where we're at. So if I were to judge this based only on that, I probably say it's about done. That's the channel mark. I'd be surprised if this broke out and held it. And if it does that, we would probably hold up here at because it did push higher than this top. So that would be interesting. Definitely be a change of character if it held above 1180 or what have you. There's so many gaps and junk down below just coming up this far. Volume has been so-so, mostly dropping since the bottom, but kind of on average just been sort of sideways. Nothing really like particularly interesting about it except for that heavier sell-off. I don't know. Not everything is like AMC, but normally, like if I see this kind of a rise, I get pretty concerned about a steep drop, like retracement at some point. And I still think this low down here looks stronger to me. So I'm not sure what to make of it just yet. Yeah, Apple may end up sliding back. We'll see. So this is the 4-hour 180. So this would be like a back test on the 4-hour 180. And yeah, if that rejects, probably going to come down pretty far. So I think NU's actually a potential put play might be good here on NU. If you think that I'm right about this, because this would be the top. And I don't think it would go much further. If I'm wrong, oh, the 4-hour and the daily are both here. So this is a massive like hook motion back to those. So I guess the bigger picture might be important. I don't know, man. That daily looks pretty strong thus far on the MACD. MFI's got room to move. RSI, kind of a mixed bag. It's not been the best indicator of sell-offs anyways, and then at times it's not reached it and it's sold off pretty strong. I think the 4-hour was a better one, and that was the one I said once it gets to overbought, it's probably good. It never comes through the bottom without coming back up. It seems to be the case. So you wouldn't enter into a downside position even if you thought this was going to go down. You wouldn't enter into a downside position until the RSI crosses back through, and it's tough, but you wouldn't want to enter into it until it crosses back down through the yeah, and even then these have multiple rebounds, so your put position would be in a very nasty spot. So if this slides back through the top and goes through that moving average on the RSI, this has ended up being a really good arc. Just saying. I didn't think it was necessarily going to follow all the way through, but it ended up being pretty good. After that rejection, I don't know, let's just keep it simple maybe and use a yeah, it's likely going to come back to 1099.11. There's a gap there, and that's the 618. So maybe back down to 1099. This seems pretty likely. So this would be then a generative wave to the downside here. So you would have a cross of that. So it may not get there until next Friday. It could be a long downward week if it does take that long. I mean, MACD on the 4-hour looks pretty strong back here. But the weird thing is, like, again, my positions just never grew. If I had held them, maybe they'd be good. Maybe they'd be better, but they just were dead, like really dead. So I'm not sure this is a great options chart or an options ticker. It just doesn't really have I didn't have any follow through on it. It was fine. It was working. It just didn't have the ramp up. This is starting to look bearish here. The these double top motions on the MFI, this is not coming up as high. So that would be bearish divergence on these two tops. But that's been the problem all along, is like the volume hasn't really been following through. This is the biggest follow through that we had right there. So I'm curious about that top too. Let's look at the 1 hour. 1 hour, same deal. 1 hour is also bearish here to here. And it's starting to look not great. You're getting a kind of a double top there. MACD doesn't look bad. It's actually elevated, so it's weaker than it maybe you would expect it to be. Kind of dancing along like a cross down. But it looks to me like it's holding. I mean, it's probably going to capitulate pretty soon. So the 1 hour is there, the 2 hours here at 11.94. So maybe $12 would be a good place to, probably be a pretty good place to set up shop. This ended up being really good. This guy, that's right where it is. It's nice. So what I've learned is that this is what I'm best at. I'm just going to say it. Like over the last few years, like this tends to be the best. Tends to be my best strength, is like mid to short term rebound type moves like this. I tend to read them pretty well, and I do a pretty good job of finding those targets, and they usually work out. Whereas like the bigger moves are so long term that I end up finding the wrong things, and it's not like always wrong, but it's usually like I'm kind of a shot in the dark. So more so than, unfortunately, than shorter terms. I tend to be pretty good at this. I'm not pat myself on the back too much, but like this kind of stuff, like finding those targets, I feel like that's really easy. Like yesterday doing this targeting here, I was like, it's going to come back up. It's just a matter of like, when do you buy in? I've just bought in too early. But like I knew it was going to come right back up there. And not because of max pain, but because of the ledge that was left in the cross section here. I was like, it's going to go when it waves back up. And I can find that pretty easily. Like I was using these upward trajectories yesterday, and I'm like, there was one here and there was another one like right in the middle here to here. That was the one I deleted, but it was like actually really kind of odd. But it was like over here. I want to say it was like that. But anyways, there was an odd one right here that I found that was bizarre. This is one of my better strengths. This is like where I'm making a lot of money trading too, is like the setups. So I knew like the targets themselves when we started doing this. We started this back in, what was it, like the 7th? So it's been a while. Like back on the 7th, we had developed all these targets. Like we had just decided it was probably going to come up here and it was going to hit this target and then maybe come up and hit this target, and it did. And it's not that complex. I mean, it's a channel, but I think the timing of it in that channel, if you can get a good wave that's consistent, the timing of it's really where you make the most money if you're trying to do options. My problem is that the contracts that I got were garbage and just didn't grow. So if you had just traded shares, this would have been a pretty decent trade from the point of my entry up. I think that's like 13%. That's a good trade for just shares only, especially considering it didn't take that long. 13% over the course of like a week or two is not bad. So I don't know, man. You guys should kind of play me to my strengths, I guess. Like, you know, Booksy's pretty decent at doing wave setups within channels and getting pretty good targets with timing even. That's a good place to be. You can capitalize on that, then you have a strategy to make some money. That's all I'm going to say about that. Otherwise, I'm just going to be bragging. My brain is kind of screwed up, you know, does weird stuff sometimes. But it's the one that I was given. This morning we went to the bakery before I got on stream, and as we're leaving the bakery, I'm like, oh, there's this plant, right? And we're walking by this plant. It has these huge broad leaves. It's not an elephant, the elephant leaf plant or whatever they call it, but it's got because it looks like big elephant ears. But it's kind of like that. It's just more upright, and they were like thick, and they weren't maybe a little bit smaller. And I was like, man, those look like so like dense. They almost looked fake. I knew they weren't fake. I could tell they were real because there was some decay on some of them. And I'm like, yeah, they look real, but they were so like dense. And I was like, I took off one of my gloves, walk over to it, and I started like pinching it and feeling it. And I'm like, man, like why? I'm thinking about like those words like chloroform and all this other stuff, and like thinking about the cells of the plant. I'm like, man, it's like density, and like the bottom of these leaves look like, you know, dude on steroids with like thick veins. And I was like, man, this like plant is crazy. And like my brain is going like that direction in the middle of a bakery, and my wife comes up and like I'm some kind of a child or something. She's like, come along now, like let's go. And I was like, okay. And then I'm like walking out of the bakery, and I looked at her and I said, was that weird? And she said, yeah, it was weird. I was like, well, I needed to touch it. I don't know what it was. It was like a compulsory thing, like a compulsion. She's like, yeah, it was a little weird. I was like, wait, were people like looking? She's like, yeah, people were looking. I was like, I don't care. I want to go back and touch it again. I was like, that was just interesting to me. I like really wanted to feel the plant. I couldn't, and I was like, I don't really care if people were looking, but I was asking her because I was like, why did you come get me? Well, first of all, we were leaving, but we should have been leaving. But anyways, that's my brain, man. I don't know. It is what it is. I love like the tactile feel of plants. There's plants that I touch. I don't know what it is. I can't help myself. I want to know if it's like waxy or like soft or rigid or smooth. Like there's just something about the plant leaves that I don't know what it is. Like I just really want to see what it feels like and see if my eyes are like are accurately understanding what that texture is. I don't know. It's a weird thing. Ugh, anywho, crazy person, Booksy. Yeah, so shorter term, this looks like it's getting to that place where it's typically turned down on 2 hour. I'm looking at the MACD. Yeah, I mean, it could be breaking out, I suppose, if you were to use this as a guide. That 2 hour looks like it could be, but I would actually say this is already, like this was a heavy divergence, so maybe that divergence has been satisfied and it's kind of correcting back up, and the rest of it's going to be funny. Borophyll. Yeah. I don't know, man. That's funny. Yeah, this is interesting. So this is really, oddly, if I were looking at this only on the 2 hour, I would probably say that looks really bullish. If I just saw the MACD by itself and I was looking at this as a potential play, that's probably what I would be looking at right there. If I'm just looking at one thing, right? That's what I would be looking at, like cross up and over. But I don't think by itself that's quite enough. It might be that this doesn't actually go down first. I may be overzealous about this downside. It could go back up and fill at least one of these gaps before that. You know, we're talking about a lot of this stuff pumping into February. We could possibly be like that. It's not impossible. Anyways, so mixed bag, I guess, is what I'm trying to say on NU. I'm seeing a possible strength here. Yeah, like you were saying, Reese, it hasn't come back up on the daily yet. But if it follows through like it did on the 2 hour, it might. It's just a sort of a transitional period right here. Like the 4 hour and the daily are more important. So the snowball has reached that point, but it hasn't yet. I mean, 4 hour has jumped, but it's the moving average up here that I look at, the 180 hasn't. It's still beneath it. So there's a chance it like squeezes up to like 317 or something, this previous floor, and still drops. Technically, that would just be like a higher. Yeah, like right here. It's possible that going into earnings, this still comes up. I had a lot of ideas that this was probably going to continue down, and I still think that's a possible setup. Weekly looks meh, but it is curled up like it's trying, but it doesn't really mean much. It just crossed down. I mean, so it's got to find a bottom. I don't know. One indicator is not enough to make trades based on, not usually, unless you're doing something really specific. It's probably not the best idea. So I'm going to go look at the daily here. And then I know I said WTO. I didn't forget. Yeah, so I mean, daily MFI has room. I mean, at this point, even if it did back up, which is possible right here, even if it did back up, it could still go again. You know, you could have a backup and then go again into earnings where this kind of builds back out and then, yeah, right before earnings or whatever kind of squeezes back up. It's sort of a widening approach here as opposed to just straight up. So, yeah, that looks decently possible to me as well, that this pushed the resistance and then it's going to come out to the side and try to move up into earnings. Falls into line with the pattern too, which was this big push up, big retrace, big push up, big retrace, big push up, big retrace. It's been retracing all the way back down to these original tops and then pushing downward. So you would expect it to go here. Yeah, potentially. I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm actually thinking this might be a good quick put play just down here, just because that drop would be, again, like 11% or something. I'd have to look closer at it to really make a good call on it, though, like as to where I think it goes. But for now, I think that's possible, and maybe even probable that it backs up and then tries to go again. I'm trying to see what else is there, but I'm not really finding a lot of success. I think the hourly was around 11. It's risen a little bit. It's like almost 11.50 now. It was like back here around 11.30 when we crossed it. And that would support this idea of like a 50-50 down, something to wrap around. As we wrap down through it, this would make sense to come back down, to test it at least down to 11.60. About 30-minute last one here. 30-minute, same exact place. It's almost all in support of a move back to this creek here around 11.50, 11.60. So there's a decent chance that no matter what happens, it's going to come back there. Yeah, and there's a gap. So I think this might be a good like place for puts. But it's not confirmed a breakdown just yet, so Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And then the next level up, I feel like it is pretty accurate, this curve. I think if it comes outside this curve, what I would be expecting is that it kind of builds out to the side. If I'm wrong and it just takes off Monday, then I'm wrong, but I would have to look into it, but I wouldn't be surprised if this chilled out, even came back down to 12 today. If it does stay high to 1250, I don't know, man. There'll be a lot of bulls thinking that that's definitely bullish, because technically that's outside the creek, or outside the trend. It could be thought of as very bullish. Maybe you just squeeze Monday. I don't know. You know what? I'd have to wait until basically near the end of the day, because we'll have to see if this set up as a distribution. So maybe later I'll check it out. WTO. So yeah, multiple up thrusts to this area, followed by a downward motion. Let me take a look. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I don't do this very often, but I think every now and then it's good to try to do this, is, let me see if I can get it. Well, I'm not seeing the wicks though. Let's go down to hourly and then use, I might be able to adjust it. So I think it's using opening and closing value. Precision. I don't know what this means. 15 decimals? Oh, geez, no, I don't want that. Default, that's not what I want. I want close, let's say high, low, open. That's interesting. That's super different. So that's just high plus open plus high plus low plus close divided by 4. So you're taking an average of all those things. Open, high, low. Why can't you have high and low? Close. Why can't you just show me all the highs and the lows? Why does it have to be one or the other? This is silly. I want highs and I want lows. Too bad. You can't have both. Why not? Why do I have to pick one? I don't know. You just do, Booksy. This is the closest you're going to get. Highs and lows divided by 2. Am I going crazy? Shouldn't you be able to do both high and low? Why can't you do both? I don't know. Whatever. I'll just do that one. All right. So divergence here going, there's downward momentum, right? On the, and I mean, we're looking at a penny stocks, keep that in mind, but there's downward momentum here regardless. You're making lower lows. You've got upward momentum on the hourly, okay, here. So this was divergent. So this divergence is starting to pay off very quickly, unfortunately maybe, very quickly on the RSI. What you don't really want to see is that this pumps up on the RSI and gets, let's just say, overbought too quickly when the price action hasn't really advanced. This is a level, if you can kind of squint your eyes, you'll see that high and that low right here. This level of intersection is very important. So this has been rejected thus far, and again, let's take a look. Let me see the highs. Yeah, so this hasn't actually made an advancement yet. This didn't come higher than the previous top. It came lower. So it's trying to turn around. And then let me check lows. Let's see, and this dumped like to a new low. So it looks like, again, it's doing that thing where it's like double flushing out. The reason I chose to use the lines was because I was having a little bit of difficulty visualizing it, and now I'm seeing it better. So, yeah. Because there's just a lot of gaps in this chart. It makes it hard to read for me. Visually, I'm just like not seeing the moves very well. But now I'm seeing it better. So it pumped up, didn't go higher, so it made a lower high, and then it drops to a lower low. So it still looks kind of bearish. So my guess is that the see, this is trying to divert now right here. This actually did come up slightly. So that was an attempt to break and reverse on the precipice, probably of this divergence. Instead, when it sells off, it's heavy. So if it can break above the top at this point, it's actually pretty bullish because this could be thought of as like a spring. Technically this didn't go above the top. It's still kind of healthy in a weird way. I think this early motion right here does look like a sign of weakness to me, because this is the primary sell-off. There's a little auto reaction, and then it comes lower, and it goes up again. So that looks really kind of bearish. But then when this makes a higher low and comes up again, the only explanation is it's an up thrust, so this would be like a UTAD. But if it can come over the top, then that's a change of character for the better, because technically if it tried to advance and it did push over the local one, and then it comes down low and it does it again, it could just be a widening right here, like at the very end. So that this is, instead of interpreting it as some kind of Wyckoffean schematic, it's really just a massive like shakeout, right? And it just really then depends on where it lands, because if it lands on the top, this is bullish. And it continues, it should go all the way back up to where we thought before, like up here. So the logic there may have been a little bit confusing, because I was saying like, oh, it's bearish here, but then this is kind of bullish. But it has to do with the fact that this diverted in the middle. This would be like your phase B period. And so it could be a change of character, in which case then you would look at it as like, well, it made a higher high here, so it's actually widening. So if this can finish and break out, then it's fine. I don't really think you'd read it as a UTAD. But otherwise, what I would say and suggest is that if I were just continuing down the original path, is that this is probably a UTAD, and it doesn't actually break out here. It just tests it, and then it goes back down and finishes this greater sign of weakness here, which probably started there, since this is where the first support was, and this is right above it, and then it goes below it. I would use that and suggest that that's probably what's in store, and or this one. But both of those would be fine. I don't think it's necessarily going to go super low here. It's got some indication that we may end up back here before anything else anyways. So that's at around 25. So yeah, I mean, maybe today, if it comes above 33, 34 Monday or today, I'd be bullish again up to about 40. And if otherwise, I don't think you could assume this is bullish. I think you'd have to suggest that this is bearish, that it's just a UTAD, like a double up thrust. It's going to dump again here and go lower. Yeah, that way. So, all right, that's probably all I can say about WTO for now. Still watching Fang. Long play here. I told you guys that I thought this would come up and then probably come back down, and I would be waiting. Just like somebody coming through the window at night, and you just click on the light and you're just waiting in the chair. I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for this to come back down because I think this is a pretty strong chart, and I think you can trade it on the RSI alone, longer term. But I also think this is really bullish. It broke out, and I have long-term divergence here. This is massive long-term divergence here on this bottom. So I'm really just waiting to see if it retests here. This is exactly where I thought it might go. I don't know if it's going to go immediately or if it's going to go after earnings or it's going to run up into earnings. So it's really more about getting a good entry. There's a lot of little gaps all throughout here coming down. So if you were just going to be like a gap person and be like, oh, I'm just going to play this, you know, every time there was a gap on here. Well, the lowest one is like 166. Or no, I've got it marked off. Sorry, it's 163. And there's another one at 166, and then there's like another one right here at 170 or thereabouts, 170.90. So there's a lot of potential to come low. I would imagine, since this is the 4-hour 180, that this checks it and dives deep before it goes. So I think this bounces out and kind of comes down a bit more. And I'm thinking it's probably going to be into that earnings. This is coming up pretty soon. So this will be, it's like a month away, but that's pretty soon. And if it managed to hold a higher level and break out, I want to know, because if it comes back up in the future and breaks out above the recent tops here, it's probably going to do so mid-February. And then you could have a run up into earnings. This one dumped into earnings. This one dumped into earnings. This one ran up into earnings a little bit. This one was obviously running into earnings, but it was ready to break out. This one was kind of in the middle. Doesn't really seem like it's been drastic differences, but remember, like big picture wise, this is a massive upward channel. So yes, there's things that you'd want to concern yourself with volume, especially here on this peak. But I think this is a wave cross down. So my expectation would be that it would build out and then break up. And if it does, then it's going to go back to 213. And I think I did some math on it, but if you get in at the right time, it's probably going to be about a 300% option swing. This will be a little trickier to trade with shares, being that it's more expensive. It's not a humongous trade with shares. If you bought in at like, I don't know, if it happens to get as low as 165 or something, it's still a 30% swing. But that's the more or less guaranteed part of it. The rest of this, I'm not saying it's going to be 1-to-1, but it's probably going to be pretty close, because what this typically has done is it's come back up to the previous top, and then it takes the rest of that time to kind of build out and sort of develop a range before kind of marking up to the top. And this has been fairly consistent. Like, this is more or less what I would expect. So I don't think this is going to be a long term. I think, yeah, we're talking about 2026. I mean, so this particular setup looks really, really good to me if certain things play out the way that I think they will. We're not quite there yet, so I wouldn't jump the gun and be like, get in. I don't think that's wise. I feel like the best, because this is a slower moving chart, it's best just to kind of wait. Well, once it starts moving, yeah, it's going to move pretty quick. So that's my thought anyways on this, is that it should move pretty fast. So I'm not anticipating significant downside, but you can see I doodled back in the day this little creek on the higher mark here. And I think this is probably the goal for the shelf. So just like you had support here, inversely, I think you're going to need to get some support here. And then I think you're going to get that push out. So we will see. Well, not positive anything yet, but we'll see. I think this is a good setup. And if it gets back to this point, I'm in it for sure. I'm going to enter because I think it'll be a good setup. The risk is always there, you know, that does something different, drops through. But that's just what you do in the market. You know, everything has risk. It's never like a guaranteed win, you know, in the marketplace. So, yeah, and IWM is pushing, it's trying. I'm kind of surprised. I was pretty sure that once this got up to the top, that this would fail. It may very well fail next week and start coming back down. But this was another one that I was like, I'm really looking forward to it because I think once it comes back down and we build out a bit more, I think we're in a good spot to like come back up and break out potentially in the future. If that's what happens, I'd be really excited about that. It can be a new entry and a new chance at kind of getting back in for small caps. So yeah, this option swing was done. I traded this from like 216 up to like 224. You guys know that because I said I was thinking it would come back to 220s. Did not trade 225 to 230. Even if I called it out, I didn't trade it because I just didn't want to trade it. You know, at this point, I'd already made money on this. Good money, easy trade. That was that. I was kind of done with it. Now I think we're going to start talking about if this can't hold, I think we're going to start talking about retracement. We'll see. Nothing is ever set in stone completely in the market. But I think we've got to come back to this 4 hour. And I don't imagine that it'll be horrible, but I think we'll probably slide through it. Maybe we'll get the gap, maybe we won't. And then we'll talk about like breaking out here. This would make more sense to me. Is it technically above the 4 hour? Yes. Could it technically just keep going? Maybe. I mean, there's room. It could pop up and go further. You know, we may see that gap doesn't ever get filled and this just comes back here later on. You know, but either way, I'm waiting for that buyback or that opportunity to buy back in, and I'm patient about it. Whether it's high first, then down, or it goes ahead and goes down, it doesn't really make a huge difference to me. What if it just goes, Booksy, and just goes and doesn't ever let you get back in? Oh well. I don't know what to tell you. Oh well. I mean, like, the ideas here of it coming back are really more just about the basic movement of the market. I don't necessarily think it's bearish just because it comes back down. I just that we pushed out right here, right? This is the daily, and we haven't checked it yet, right? And it would just make sense to me that once you push this resistance a little bit on the edge, that you then back up and go back down for that liquidity check. So like, to me, I'm like, it seems like a no-brainer. It already made an advancement here. This is like an Eve and Atom bottom. And then once it comes back down, it breaks out again from the bottom of that flag. It's going to be another push. So what the Eve and Atom bottom is it's sexist, Booksy. That's what it is. From this male-dominated field. I mean, it probably to some degree, I guess. I don't know. But like the even atom bottom is like flat. You're like, is this about genitalia? Yes, it kind of is. Don't know why they decided to make it like this, but this is the way it was named. And then it's a phallic move up to the top, and that's the push. So that's the atom. I know. Because like, what? I don't know. I don't know if that's it or if it's coming out of his side. Maybe that's the analogy. Eve's coming out of his side. I don't know. his ribs. I have no clue why it's named that. But that's just the name of it. So the eve is the flat, and then there's a dive, and then there's the atom, which is a push back up that breaks out. Usually what happens is that you get some kind of a handle after, which would be like, again, a retracement back and then sideways. If the handle holds, then this motion of like chop here, this is the eve. If that in the atom, if the handle holds, then and it doesn't come back below too far, then the breakout ends up being right here when the handle ends. And technically, you can't confirm this. I know it's a silly confirmation. I want to say this is the way it is. I'd have to go double check. But technically, you can't confirm this, I think, until the top, which is kind of a long way to go. But this is like confirmation right here that's actually gonna break out. And I'd have to go back and consult the setup, but I think it's a really easy one, because what you do is you take this and you just measure from the handle breakout. I think that's the measurement. It's really straightforward. And that's where it usually goes. So if, for example, this went up higher, you could still use it, right? It doesn't matter where exactly you use it. You could still use it, even if this like pushes higher and continued to ride up. You can still technically use this if it comes back and makes a handle. You just measure it differently. So you would just still measure to whatever the new top is. But for now, like let's say that this is the top and it doesn't go significantly higher and it came back down and it broke out maybe underneath the creek or something. It kind of looks like it's going to go, doesn't it? Just take off. Maybe it will. You could still use that as the measurement tool to like where it goes later. But if it went up higher, then yeah, you have potential that, let's say it pushes up and hits this cross trend up here at like 2.6. Let's say, yeah, 236. That seems about right. And then it comes back down and it builds out a handle, and it still breaks out on the top here. And then you can use that as a target. So this ends up being a really easy trade because you have a very simple method of entry and exit. You can trade either the first part or the second part, doesn't really matter. I mean, you can trade from the bottom if you want risk on, or you can trade from the confirmation if you want a little risk off. You're not going to get as big of a trade, but it's safer for sure. So this will be like a push up, the back up. Don't know how long that takes, but then you get the next move, right? And as it's set up right now, who knows how far that goes, but I would suggest that it could be like a 50-50 kind of deal, like down to 224.80. We just leave that gap and then push out from there all the way up to 250, which sort of makes sense because you've given us a way of getting back to the top. And I think there was a wave structure here. Yeah, this is supported with the bottom there. I don't know why that's off. It should be right there. That had already hit that. So building out and upward, you would expect it to come back to the top at some point. So this would be like that reaction, then back up. So there's a really good chance that once this gets a second move here, and if we do get that buy back in, they'll be in a really good spot to go. And this could be a very big trade. That's a decent sized move. It's like 11%. In contracts, it's probably going to be pretty significant if you play options. So, all right. Fang is one that I've been watching, and that's one that we will keep watching. But for now, let's look at Wolf. And MPW's almost to that target zone right here around 490. I don't think the swing really demands more than that, like maybe 488. So my swing will be done, I think, when it hits about 480. Honestly, I might start exiting some of that position anyways, because like, frankly, it's looking so-so. Like, it might hit that and just kind of be over. That's the daily, be oversold. So it's hard for me to imagine that it pokes into oversold territory and doesn't sell off. It's already there. So I may start exiting that swing that I got in. It's a simple swing trade. I'm a little nervous because I think those contracts didn't really mature very well, but I had some shares only, so maybe it'll be all right. The shares only are up 15%, so I can't really complain very much about that. I think that was a good trade, maybe more like 16. Let me double check. I'm not going to complain about that. To me, that looks very positive on the whole. So pretty happy with that. Yeah, it's going to be a tough one because it actually is above my average now. So I'm not sure. I may be able to exit quite a bit and re-enter if it comes back down. So I'm going to have to check. Like, it's above my total average now of shares accumulated. And I have a lot of shares, so why not just hold them, Booksy? I mean, I could. But I get the feeling that it's still going to come back down, so yeah, man, this looks pretty good, Wolf. Not like great, but it looks pretty good. I don't know. I mean, it does look a lot like what we drew here. This is what we would expect. Or here. It's kind of a combination of the two, isn't it? It's just sitting here right now. So what needs to happen is simple. It's like it needed to cross this creek, which is on the outside here. It did that today. And then after that point, it made a higher low. So it did make a double bounce. It pushed up. I'm a little nervous because on the hourly, this didn't really come down very far, but it did check that jump. So what else needs to happen here? Not much. It's really close. Pushing over 676 is still ideal. I don't know where my alerts went on this. Maybe they triggered earlier. I think one of them did. This is still ideal to come back above here and find that support. But let's check the 4 hour. Maybe there's a case that this is ready to go. Yeah, so this is really nice. See how it came back down and like kissed that line and then it's pushing off again. It looks good. And that EMA is way up here, y'all. It hasn't even like made that advance yet. Back to like 970s. So Wolf looks pretty hot right now. Looks good. Nice low volume drop. It's just that one last step. Let me get rid of my little doodles here. So I think that's not really helping see it better. It's that one last step of like, it needs to sort of make that advancement. You see how it hasn't advanced yet over this peak? So there's a little piece missing here. And then it's good to go. So it went up to 656. So that's very important because if it's going to go, what should happen is it should make this advancement. I don't think it necessarily has to go like super high. It would be good at some point to check this marker up here, like I said, around above 675. But it may very well be more methodical about it and do it one at a time. It's like, I don't know. You can't really tell from this vantage point. I just can't see it necessarily going all the way up first. But But yeah, right this moment, I would say that that probably is going to happen in 2 stages. So I would imagine this pushes up and then comes back down, check this bottom breakout. And if that happens, that's really, really good. I think you'll see a another push above. And I don't know, man, we're getting really close to this January 29th date. So I guess my biggest concern right now is that somehow this washes out right at earnings or something. Like it comes down into cat ear setup here, like sideways. That's my biggest concern right now. It wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world. It's just, maybe this is like an S curve. It's just that if it ends up doing this into earnings, I think you'd be a little less confident, right? Like you wouldn't be 100% sure. But man, that's a heavy, heavy buy-in, isn't it? That daily looks really good. It held above here. And all these EMAs are way high, like way up here where these gaps and stuff are. This closed at 1371. It's like right there. We got a nice wedge kind of action going on. Just needs that breakout. I'd love to say it's a sure bet, but it's just not quite there. So that 618 goes back down to the floor. And the breakout here would be way up high. Let's say it breaks out on earnings right there. Yeah, it's likely going back to 17, back to the top if it does that. So the manufactured breakout here, if this works out, and this wedge does break out, the manufactured number for that would be here. And that does really coincide quite well with like a daily check. Coincides quite well with that, and also coming up to the top and this outer trend. So there's just a lot going on right here in this pocket. But I don't necessarily think, again, that I have it over here as well. Like it doesn't have to happen all at once. The thing about these breakout targets for like wedges and other things is like we always imagine it's just going to go straight up. But there's never really a timing principle involved unless you're looking at entry and exit trajectory kind of stuff. I would suggest that this exit trajectory is probably going to be like the best one, and you can see it's sort of matching right here. So I think it is a good estimation. That's probably the better estimation for exit trajectory. So even if this had like a big push, it's very possible that this doesn't actually get to these higher targets until, you know, like over here or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it could take a minute. So longer term is better. So I'm thinking like March, and I think that's what I had here was like, you might go way out to like March 21st. If you're going to do something short term, maybe 9 next week, but that's kind of dangerous. If you think there's going to be an earnings pop and not a drop, I mean, you never know. I mean, they could dump on earnings and come way down, then go back up. If it hasn't already gotten to this point, we're just not going to know. So it won't do that. Well, never say never, man. Those kind of flushes happen all the time. They're not always definitive. Sometimes they're just there to get it oversold again on a certain time frame or just shake some people out. I could certainly see it happening, like get set up into this and then just dump really hard. You know what I mean? this kind of crap happens more often on like your AMCs and stuff, where you get these nasty spills and whatnot, and then it filled the gap and then it just goes. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not going to kill you, but it's also whatever. So I think I'm feeling more and more comfortable just getting in a longer position. I think the short term is a bit much. It's a bit risky because I could definitely see it dumping somehow into that Friday and just holding low and just squashing all these calls or something, just wringing the neck of the options chain, like, get out, and you know what I mean? Like, I just don't, you can't possibly know. That could definitely happen. So I think longer is better. So maybe even March and April, we've got some good ones there. And I'm going to have to decide about MPW, man. I think that decision needs to be made post haste. And yeah, the options just didn't swing, so they didn't change. It's a little unfortunate, but it is what it is. But it's a good trade. I mean, I traded, got some money on that, so maybe that's all there is to it for now. I don't have a lot that's particularly high. There's really only a couple. I bought a couple positions at like 550 and 480 that were like higher. I have some positions that are really low, but if MPW comes back again, I'm going to lose it. I like that it pays a dividend. Don't get me wrong. But if it ends up dumping, well, if it ends up running, then you're going to have nothing, Booksy. Yeah, pretty much. It's all or nothing, guys. It's all or nothing. Sometimes that's the way of life. All or nothing. Oh, charge point. Look at you. Ooh. You guys are like, charge point. Death. I got to talk about this chart. There's a long conversation that probably needs to be had, and I don't think I'm going to do it today. I'll give you the short of it. I did a long-term channel breakdown for this as best I could. And it's mirroring out pretty well waveform-wise. And so there should be some kind of a move coming into April. At first I thought it was almost guaranteed because of the way this set up that it would come back to the top, which no longer is like way up here. It's down here at like 370. That's the highest I think it's going to go if it can get there. And I do think it's possible that it can triangulate and get there. But in reality, there's really no telling how low this could go. Once you hit like that dollar region, you just don't know. And Trump pulled back a lot of things. I mean, he did a ton of stuff. For better or worse, that's not for me to decide. That's for you to decide for yourself. But one of the things he did do was he revoked the Biden's goal to have like 50% EV or something. So that's going to potentially boost your oil and gas stuff, but it's also going to cut the legs out from your EV people. So like the future's coming, and whether Trump or whoever likes it or not, there's no doubt that that's the trend now, is for more EV vehicles and more EV infrastructure. And I know that we've had people come in and say, well, only 5% or 2% of car sales are actually these EV sales. Yeah, but guys, that's early adoption of technology is always like that, always. And then all of a sudden it's not. Then all of a sudden it's 10%, then it's 50%, then it's 75%. And it's like that with everything. There was a time when you couldn't imagine owning a household computer because they were giant and had to fill a room and they were expensive. And even when they first came out, it was like not everybody had them. Oh, you have a computer in your home. Wow. You know what I mean? And if you did have one, it was like janky piece of junk, you know, and then internet. And it's like all this stuff is, it's like the early adoption of it would have easily been all technology. iPhones were like that, iPods and junk. They were too expensive at first, you know? All early adoption is like that. Technology trends have never changed in that way. Video games. Oh, video games will never be a thing. The arcade is where they live, you know? Oh, now you can play video games in your home. Well, yeah, but it's expensive and it rots people's brains and yada, yada, yada. And now look at where we are. It's like one of the biggest industries in the world. And it's like, I'm not necessarily saying I know the future. I don't know the future. Maybe something will come out that's better. It's like, remember HD DVDs? Some of you are always like, no. That's because Blu-ray happened right when HD DVDs were happening, you know. So you never know. 5 years from now, there could be some other fuel source that's discovered, and it's better than everything. And all of a sudden, all this stuff is worth nothing. You know what I mean? But right now, this is still the emerging technology category. And you always see those statistics. Like if you had bought Apple 30 years ago, how much would it be worth? Well, it'd be worth a heck of a lot of money, right? I think that for ChargePoint, there's not a fundamental argument to be made. Like, regardless of earnings per share, regardless of all that other stuff, yeah, you could make bearish cases or bullish cases based on this or that. But regardless of those things, the U.S. just made a statement to the world saying that we're not devoted to doing this. So regardless of whether it happens or not, the U.S. just made that statement. That causes the stock to get hurt, right? So I would caution that there's not a fundamental case to be made for this right now. And honestly, you could make probably a stronger case that it's just stuck in a downtrend indefinitely that eventually ends in like, you know, going to zero or something. And it's ultimately your only hope is that you're going to come back to this side trend. What I'm saying right now is that there is a waveform pattern here. I think it's very apparent because this is a cat ear top. This is a cat ear bottom, and then this is a cat ear top. So there's a wave that's appearing here, and I'm seeing the same kind of thing like right now. So this is, again, kind of a bottoming area. This would be considered a topping area, and you might say, well, it didn't go up. You know, that's not good. Yeah, but it's missing a piece, and I would get to that in a minute. And that piece is a reaction back up to the middle that I think is just not there. And I do think we're going to probably see it, but that's another bigger conversation, perhaps for another day. Some of these trajectories are so ridiculously good, they suggest that you're heading this way. And this is where I was on ChargePoint the other day. It was like, man, there's a lot here that does support, like a lot that supports further upside, like trajectory-wise. It's really strong, that bracketing here, that wave. But I don't necessarily think that wave has to complete. And one of the things I'm concerned about is that this gets in the way of that. So there's a lot of issues that you could talk about with the EV manufacturers and all that jazz. I did some measurements based on the S-curve, and if it's a full S-curve, this needs to come down really low. It's going to end up being like 67 cents if it's a full S-curve. If it's shallow, there's more than one reason for this, but if it's shallow, it stops either now or right at like 85. And that has to do with these parallels, and then there's also some other information that I don't have on this chart. I kind of did this chart like 3 times, but this would indicate like a possible bottom right here. And then timing wise, where do you hit that bottom? Like that would also be determinant, you know, as to how low you go. Anyways, point is, this wave is looking for a reactive move soon. Like it should be finishing up and heading back up again towards the top, just like it did here. I think we're in that motion of we're going to see it again. And I think it's basically kind of positioning itself around April and May, much like these other stocks that we were talking about. So there's a good chance in my mind that this is going to have a reaction at least back up to $1.50 from wherever it lands. So is it a great play? That's not for me to decide. You guys got to decide that. Do I think it's necessarily the strongest? No. There's a case to be made that it goes farther, up towards, again, like the 350s. It hasn't come back to this area, much like AMC, in a really long time. There is a waveform that's there, and it seems to expire very soon. I think it's a strong wave, but I also think that you got to be careful because just because it's there doesn't mean it's going to complete. And it's a lot like AMC in that regard. Like, it has that walk down. It looks pretty nice. You definitely see a lot of consistency here in that waveform and the breakdown. But again, like, does it necessarily get there? I don't know. That's a tough question. When does it get there? I don't know. It could be June, could be earlier. Either way, though, it doesn't make a huge difference because before that happens, I think you need to break out of this middle. And so there would be some kind of a move to the center. And that's really where I think the bulk of this, whether or not it happens now or later, the main kind of yes, I think this is very likely, is from wherever the bottom is to like 160s. So it went from like like 92 cents all the way up to $1.06 after that really nasty sell down. And that does look like the end of this curve here. So if it came back above at some point and holds above this 114, that's the level I'm looking at, this red line. I think that's where we see that breakout and it goes up towards the top. So again, I've got little estimations on here for potential bottoms, but it really doesn't matter. If it comes above there and it holds, it should be heading back up towards this area around 160. So it could be a very good trade for you. Just depends on what your objectives are, what you want to do. It's up 10% today for whatever that's worth. I bought shares real low, so they're up, but it is what it is, It is what it is. Keep trying to sip this coffee. There's nothing in this coffee. Yeah. So big trade setups for today. Wolf, I know it's up 6%. You might get a better deal on it if you wait. It chops here today or whatever. But Wolf is looking pretty good. I think for a swing, it's a big deal swing all the way up towards 16. But it has to confirm. So technically it hasn't confirmed yet. I don't think that happens until around 750s. That would be the breakout of that wedge. You could have a lot that happens between now and then. And we've got earnings coming up right where this is supposedly heading into that breakout. So it'd be a weird situation to be in regardless. So I still think it's good, but I think that it's a dangerous kind of play, right? With a gap below at 5, you definitely feel like there's a possibility this doesn't go all the way. I will say this, just because it comes up now does not mean that it's going to continue to go. And that does bring up the question of like, well, what happens after this, right? I think after this, it's very possible this comes back down, like long term. I think I had drawn this out before, just saying, phase B, if this ends up happening down bottom, it could come back down and fill that gap later. There's no rule that says it has to somehow, and I just kind of doodled this to the side, but there's no rule that says it can't come back. It can come back later. And this could be forming out a much larger bottoming action, which I think is pretty likely, that this could have that massive push and then kind of retreat. Does make sense. It pushes up again, gets overbought. It's at historic lows. It's very volatile. Boom, boom, this nice little wedge action. I don't think it's necessarily going to just take off to the moon, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if there's a question about where that gap is, I think historically this was like one of the all-time lows, right? It's like really, really far down. Yeah. So, you know, I'd have to see where that gap is. Maybe it gapped up above that. It's probably not going to be a gap there. It was like down here, right? So it gapped up back above the previous floor here. So there's a possibility that it doesn't go. There's a possibility it doesn't go back down again. It's possible. I don't think it's super likely, but I think it's possible that it just keeps going. Yeah, I think this is the defining feature of this trend here. I think Wolf is in a good spot. NNOX, I talked about that yesterday, and I did enter a small position, but I'm not feeling very good about it. I think that it's a mixed bag here because you have possibly like a run up starting like as what happened in these previous two examples, where after it hit the floor it jumped the creek and then it has like a buy-in period. And both of these did the same thing. So it makes it very attractive because you're like, well, if it does it, then it should be going up towards this top. I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to look at this. I certainly think that's a possibility. There is indication that there's a very steep trend here that does seem to terminate near the top of this channel at like 1190 or 12. Big picture, this looks like a massive, we've talked about this. This is a huge possible trade, guys and gals. This one is a huge diamond. So it has a very strong chance of coming back to 22 and then all the way up to 36 long term if this breakout holds. But my biggest concern right now is this. Like on the 4 hour and the daily, this thing is like did not reset its RSI. It's been building out really ever since this bottom towards the upside. And I'm just concerned because it's been getting repeatedly overbought, and there's a heavy amount of volume associated with those moves. So I'm just not positive. Maybe it's just pushing levels, it's building out, and it's going to come out and then take off. Who knows? Could be earnings or something like that. And we don't know. You know, there's a possibility it takes off here and then settles for a bit and then takes off at earnings, or it could just go, right? I don't have a strong enough sense of like where that needs to happen to like guarantee anything. Normally what I would do is I would look at something like this and gauge it by, all right, there was an expectation that there's a wave here and then it retested it and failed. I think this is probably the best that I could do. And this would indicate that, and I'm looking back here at this April 26th bottom, this would kind of suggest to me that, yeah, all right, maybe it's sooner than later. It's like by, again, April or May, this could be breaking out. This is a humongous play. So I did look at 12.5 calls for, I got 12.5 calls for out in February. If it pushes up again, I want to just see that. I'm not convinced that it's going to just run right up though and just keep going, especially if it goes all the way up to this top. I got a feeling like it could be way later. This is very, very possible like that this comes up and then piddles out and could just sit for a bit, you know, going into earnings. We really don't have any way of knowing what exactly happens here, you know. So at this point, while I would love to say it's just going to rocket straight up like it did back here, I don't think I could necessarily advocate for that and just say like, oh, it's definitely going to happen. Like, I don't know. So long term, I'd be looking for stuff maybe out in July. And then short term, I've already entered a short term 1250 trade for February. So yeah. Yep. Yep. Apple looks like it's slumping again. It dumped. So it got its drop. So at this point, I think that Head and Shoulders completed, unfortunately. It looks weird, but I think it completed. So I think it's going to head down. Weirdly, it kind of already hit the, I mean, I say weird, I keep saying weird. It already hit that weakness here, but I'm genuinely kind of surprised by how low it is, given that Max Payne's at 225. Definitely a lot of, I guess, puts that people have a lot of interest in today specifically. So not looking too great. We'll see. This is the 618 right here. This is probably the 6.5. That would be like your golden pocket traditionally. But to me, it just looks like it pushed down through the floor. So yeah, so we're looking at now a larger Head and Shoulder structure that could break if this doesn't reverse. Tried, man. It tried to push out here, but just couldn't do it. So we have a wider creek now. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, it's outside of its trend too. So that was probably where that bigger drop came from. The volume right here is slumped. So I have no idea. We'll see what happens on this if it recovers. And it did the same thing yesterday. It kind of went farther than I expected and then had a recovery pop. So there's a similarity to that where it's like walking it down really, really low. And then there was a pop. We might see something similar here with this walk down. It's like flattening out. So I'm going to look at Wolf. I'll look at the options chain on Wolf. I'll let you guys know what I'm doing. And then I'm going to probably trade out of MPW a little bit. Again, not because I'm like bearish necessarily. I just think that it might be coming into a local top. Why not wait till Monday? Oh, I don't know. And then NNOX, I'm trading, but cautiously. Kind of exiting shorter positions for February for a potential pop here to 12s again. But then beyond that, really not looking for anything till maybe way out in August. We're just not quite done yet. So, as soon as I say that, Apple's going to like turn around or something. Longer term AMC, this is another chart I had. I had a creek on here that I had drawn out what might happen here. And I was partially right. I didn't get the last part right. It's not that can't happen, but it hasn't yet. So decent amount of volume here on this bottom. It's okay. It's not the best. It's not the worst. Still looks like a big fat like cat ear potential here. So you got to be careful. I still think it's arcing outward, which I don't like. It looks like it's trying to break over the top. But this is just like what happened back here, guys. Like it's no different. You're like, yeah, it is. It's going to break out this time. Well, it might, but otherwise it's no different. So it's the exact same setup anyways. So just like back here, it was kind of bleeding outward to the side. And I said it could have an initial push, back up, and then push again to distribute. And that's what happened. It's no different. Yeah, I think it's going to do it. I think that's what it's probably going to do today, to be honest. I think what's going to happen is just like before, they're going to like head fake to the upside, probably stop short of like 350. And then I'd be surprised. I guess it could hold at 350 the rest of the day in a cat ear or something until Monday. But I would not be surprised if this dumped back through and came really low before Monday. Like it came back down to 330 or something. I'm just saying. So this is a zone that could potentially, like, yeah, we could just sit here and like chop. That would be a little different than last time, albeit it could still be bearish. But this is identical to that setup right here, where it got that head fake cat ear and then dumped back through. So don't put your cart before your horse or whatever. Just be patient, because if it doesn't hold, I think it'll probably go low. This is widening outward, so I would expect it to try to dive. Good news about that is that widening spread does lend itself to the possibility of a major reversal. If it finishes this structure today or first thing Monday, it does lend itself to a major reversal pattern. Yeah, it's already kind of gone below the golden pocket. I think it's going to come low. I think it's going to do an 786 or 854 still. Anyways, I don't know. But who knows? IWM looks like it's trying to break out. It's interesting. Didn't think it was going to go beyond there, but it's trying. So I'm going to take a look at Wolf's options chain. Let's see what max pain is for MPW. Although I don't think it matters because it has a terrible options chain. January 24th is $4. It's got a $4 max pain. It's way above. Way above that. Well, that could cause some interesting stuff to happen. Who's Nick? Nick P? That's the daily. It's overbought on the daily. I can't find a time recently where it's been overbought and not pulled back, so I think it's going to have a pullback. Pretty decent one. All right, I'm just going to finish this trade. I'm happy with that. If it goes up, it goes up. I'll miss out a little bit. But I didn't think it was going to come significantly beyond here, so we're pretty much at the place where my sells would be. And it's already overbought. So if we go a little further, we go a little further, but and then I'm going to check out Wolf options. Oh, it's kind of like coming over the top here. It's a little like IWM. It's kind of pushing that resistance that was built out earlier. It's tempting, very tempting. So maybe a lot like IWM, which we were thinking could potentially have like another push in it before anything else happens. It's got room to move. It could have some more upside. That's possible. This is November. Yeah. Maybe we're going to see that second push here and just kind of hit that top we need to hit. I still don't know if it's going to go well beyond yet. So either way, it'd have to chill out. So it'll be an opportunity to buy again. Yeah, so all right. MPW, I'm out of that swing. Swing. Okay, just doing some math. Give me a minute. This is a weird week. Last week I had like one big trade and 2 small ones. This week I'm at like 6 small trades. It's a lot more quantity wise. It's okay. It's adding up. I hit my goals, so I'm not super worried about this week. I hit my goals like yesterday. A little late, but it's because that Apple didn't move the way I thought it would. So I went. That's why part of the reason why I did that quick trade was because I wanted to get my goals, and I knew it was going to react. I just wanted to get in on that quick trade. They're staying up decently though. Like they're at 420 now, the 230s. So I bought them at 385, so they're still up almost 10%. But anyways, I have to keep everybody updated because I said I was going to do that. So I'm just committed to doing that on MPW and stuff. So I'm going to keep everybody updated as I trade. So I did not post the shares only position, but I did, I am going to exit. I did exit this other position at 472 because I said I was going to get out between 450 and 480, but the options didn't move. Like they didn't move at all. The shares I bought, I didn't actually post about those But I bought the calls are going to be dead if they haven't budged at all, which is kind of crazy. I think they were a bad contract. So again, there's just not a lot of good options contracts for this. They only seem to explode like every now and then, at these kind of moves. So this was a 15% gain on shares. Sold. So not a bad trade for shares only. I'm pretty happy with that. If I get 15% on shares only, that's like, for me, that's like, I'm like happy, really happy with that. I think it's good. Because 5 to 10% is enough usually. So 15% is a good little swing. There, that's done. Wolf. If you're wondering, if you're asking me questions and you're like, he's not reading the chat, I'm not reading the chat right now. I'm looking at different things. Part of the reason why I didn't do very well last year at the end of the year was because I spent a lot of time streaming and I would chart like nonstop, which is great for some people. They like that. But for me, it was like I didn't make almost any money the later half of the year. I was doing really well in the middle of the summer, left and right. Not just because of AMC. I was trading a lot of things. But I started getting preoccupied in charting again, and then you end up you're waiting for like one big move, and it's like you're not trading. So that's not what I want. I don't like having I just don't like that. I don't like having the that was me. I sold. I'm just kidding. He's selling off. I'm selling off because it's getting weaker. So I'm just not a big fan of trading the AMC chart right now, like in swings, if it's not swinging very well. Now, is it possible this has a pretty decent uptick Monday with a good swing? Yeah. I might consider a weekend trade depending on how the day ends for AMC, but it would be very short. It would be like super short term, probably expiring the 31st or the first week of February, and just something like really quick from here to like 390 or something like that. And that's it. Just a quick option scalp or whatever. I'm right now, what I'm doing is looking at Wolf, and I'm going to look at February, which is a month out. And then I'll post the NNOX trade, but I've already lost money on the NNOX. Nothing's been finished. It didn't hold up. So unfortunately, NNOX is kind of a bust right now because I bought in on this consolidation and it's just kind of dying. So, I mean, maybe I got in a little too early. I don't know. It's possible. It happens. But for now, it's like not very good looking. So, yeah, this Apple trade is going to be the death of me if I don't make something on it. It's starting to look more like a wedge. Like that narrowing price action right here. It'll be like going down and then end of the day, just right back up. Yeah, it's possible, because if this has a 618 retrace at the end of the day, go right back to 224.80. This could be one of those moments of like, it goes, I mean, I don't know if it's going to necessarily do that. It's already kind of jumped this creek, so maybe it won't. Laid up on it anyways. for now, it's holding it right there. I don't know, it's consolidating. You can't really tell which way it's going to go. But if it broke out end of the day and it was like a wedge, it wouldn't surprise me if it just went straight up. Yeah, that's what I figured. So let me see if it went. Nope. Didn't push above. I was really hoping it would push above. That would have convinced me to get my feet wet here. So they have June. So let's look at March. What was the date here that I picked out? I must have done some research on it. March 21st and then June 20th. We'll look at those two. So I liked March 21st. Apparently I like the 14 strike. Yeah, it definitely has the highest volume. The higher open interest is at the 12.5. Pretty decent delta to theta ratio. A lot of implied volatility, 147%. I still like it. It's at 23 cents per contract. So I like that March 21st 14 strike. Still looks pretty good to me. And then let's look out in June. Not nearly as much interest. There's a lot of interest around 10. And they're expensive. They're $1.24. It's not super expensive, but that's probably the only place you're going to be able to get an order in for way out in June. There's not enough people buying. There's almost no volume anywhere except for those $10 strikes and the $7. People trying to buy like almost in the money stuff. So that's unfortunate. So let's look at September and April. There's nothing else available. Yeah, there's 2,000 volume at $6 in April, but that could just be again an in the money position that someone's just going to hold on to. There's nothing else there. Option chain is completely dried up. Some people are buying at the 10s for April. It would be a pain in the butt to try to get orders filled. Oh, wait. That's September. I'm sorry. I misspoke. There's a huge amount of open interest for the April 15, April 20, April 21, April 10, all those dates, but there's nobody trading them. There's no volume. Because, let me see here. Let me see what the bid and the ask look like on those. It's not super spread apart, like 3 or 4 cents. But clearly some people are like gatekeeping or whatever, refusing to give up their position for X price or whatever. That could change. Yeah, it's going to be hard to trade anything farther than March. So I think March 12, 14, 15, those strikes might be your better bets for this particular move that comes up very soon. You won't make a ton of money. The delta's not like super, super high, but that's my best one. I missed out on the MPW move because of MTTR. It's been the snail. Yeah, I'll check it out. LPSN. That sounds familiar. We'll check those two out. So I think Wolf, this is still probably the better one right here, the 14. Don't know about that 9 for next week. It seems kind of dangerous. It's like if it hit, it would be really valuable, but that's going to expire like that day. So this is on a Wednesday, so you'd have Thursday to maybe trade it. I wouldn't be surprised if they dumped it Thursday. Man, what are you doing, NNOX? NNOX is going to be like a cat ear and just die now. The cat ear does concern me, but if it crosses up and over, it shouldn't be of a concern. So right now, there's no reason to be like worried about it unless it comes back down through here. So there's an intersection that would be of concern. And I have to check if that came over the top right there. Then it would be a bad situation. There's gaps down below, so it wouldn't surprise me if this is a little different and it does end up coming back. Coming back down again here. But at this point, I think it just made a higher high. That'd be pretty bearish if it did that and then went low. Top here. 920. Nope. Kept the door open. It's a double top, so that leaves the door a little bit open for potential. This looks healthy. This didn't come back up too high. It's just walking down. Yeah. So it left the door open. What I mean is that this could technically now come down low beneath this floor right here, as long as it doesn't break the creek, and then it could take off. Because from a Wyckoffean perspective anyways, that though this is a little too short term for that, that wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world as long as it didn't go over the top. If this had gone over the top in like the manner of an upthrust after coming down here and forming a bottom, then I'd be concerned about this being a UTAD. But it didn't exactly plump back through the floor. It just kind of went up, hit the top. So it's bound by its range at this moment. So you could still get like a double bottom here or a spring slightly below 810. If, on the other hand, it goes for those gaps, I guess it's going to be pretty low before any kind of entry. We'll cross that bridge if it comes to it. I don't remember where the MTTR chart is, so I'm probably going to have to remake it, but no, it's there. Yeah, this looks good. So far, so good. So one of the things we talked about was this probably coming up, then down and up, but it actually went down first. And I think I said it to you, but that's better that it went down first. High volume here, so that could signify institutional buy-in. Yeah, I saw that. This is looking pretty good for potentially some more upside. I haven't looked at the RSI or anything like that, but it's overbought. Yeah, and there, I guess at the end of the day, this buy-in looks good because it's like from the low up. You see how that volume is bottom up, but then it is getting overbought. So that doesn't mean it can't run. It's just the theory that we had was that this was going to potentially spike to that level. And I did another chart and it was like this level here. And then maybe some kind of crazy price move up higher. And I know don't worry about the timing. I'm just showing you like position wise. If that were to happen, that might be the case. I don't know, man. It's kind of risk on now. If it were me, I'd probably just set a trailing stop down at like 515 or something, or 510. And if it started dumping back through the trend, then you'd have a stop there. You know? Like, that could be fairly simple. Just, I don't want it to break back below. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. They could I mean, the market makers, the quote unquote operators, as we call them, not market makers. Um, the operators do that kind of stuff all the time because they know that people set stops on trends and what have you. But it is what it is. You protect your money or you don't. You have to just like take that chance sometimes. I would say right now, it's very, very, very much a stone's throw away from a really nasty downside. So even if it does extend outward, I don't think it's going to last very long. I'd be really surprised if it didn't have some kind of a bigger pullback. So it's breaking out, it's trying, it looks like a wedge. I just think it's not. I mean, personally, I don't think it's worth it, but I guess it's up to you. Just to go an extra, buck could mean a lot to you, but if it breaks down here, it's going to be at least coming back down to 5. So you can't trade on hopes and wishes. You just kind of have to take it for what it is. So part of me likes the volume here on this bottom and that it hiked up. There's a higher escalation on the bottom than the top. That's technically healthy. It's better than being all in the tops or ramping up. But the peaking RSI on the daily is definitely of concern. And then there is a gap down here at like 486. So a rug pull would be pretty catastrophic at this point. I totally get why looking at it, you're like, well, it could just go. I agree. Maybe that does happen. Even though this is overblown, it still squeezes up. I hate to be that. But if it were me, and I can only talk for me, as you guys know, we're all adults here. I would be leveraging out of that position. I would be at least taking something off the table at this point in case it rug pulled. And then I'd probably have a stop at like 5 or something and just be like, I'm just not going to trade it again, or 5.15. Because if it goes back to 5, then there's a possibility, that it chills out for a bit and it holds, but I can just re-enter, roll my profits into that if it does do that. So, oh, Apple. I've been very patient with this trade, but I probably should have just got out here. I really felt like that was the better trade. Oh well. You can't go back. This looks like it's pressing down to check this trend. It is definitely that head and shoulder structure being tested. If it bleeds down, it's going to be ugly. Oh well, I'm in it now. Last one, LPSN. I think we have looked at this. Excuse me. I don't know why I keep using this dashed one. The dotted line one I kind of like because it's like a lighter version of a line. This dashed one just looks really goofy on higher time frames. So that looks like COVID. Live person. What is this about? I definitely think we've done this because I remember I think I asked that question. All right. Well, it's not a perfect. We call it like a widening spread. It's not perfect, but it's there, and it's got an increase in volume. It's got a pretty major RSI divergence on the weekly. That's a big deal. That's currently being fulfilled, I think. You can see that starts essentially at the beginning here. AI. Yeah. May 2024 to now. So it's already taking part in that AI boom. I think that's the better floor. I mean, there's two, but this looks like the sign of weakness floor. If there is a sign of weakness, that's where it would be. I think that's right. Cat ear would be here. This push down and the jump above. So it looks like it met it on the other side as a low. I think it's probably similar to this. Like it's going to do something kind of similar in regard to maybe how it reacts if it can keep momentum and break out here. It has to break out around 230 though. So it's just not there yet. There's this drop down, and I think that would be the big one. If it's sometime in the future came above here and held, then I think you've got a greater chance of some stronger continuation on like a retracement, for example. Yeah, maybe I had that a little off, but that's about right. That's the middle of that curve. So, yeah, maybe. You can see how each of these is like a potential check going back up to this one. So assuming this is a good company, and I don't know if it is, but if it actually is kind of bullish, this looks like it might go back to check like opening values. Potentially. But I don't think it's going to go way back up again. That's interesting. So I think this has a potential for something like this. And I would put this on the other side because I think it would lose a lot of strength at the 50 and then try to push up to get to the top. It certainly has the right setup for it in terms of this cross trend. So this is the trend down here, and then this is the trend up here. And so this was the one that was lost. You can see right there it was lost. So it would be logical to at some point come back and check it again. And then this one's actually being tested now. So if it can hold here, and there's a number of ways this could happen. The way I'm drawing it out makes it look super nice because you're like, oh, it just goes straight up. Yeah. The reality is far less forgiving, I think, sometimes. You know, we see things a certain way and we want it to happen that way, but I have no way of knowing just yet. Unless it holds here at 170, there's really no way of knowing that this doesn't just kind of come back down, you know, and we could see this coming out like way later from a lower low. There's just no way of knowing that. So there's so many different paths that you can take in the market. It could come above this creek and seem like, oh, it's going to break out, and then, you know, have a low drop. There's just so much that could happen. So it really has to be, I think, to be wise about this would be to suggest that this is not over until it's over, you know. And it sounds stupid, but it really is a simple setup to just sort of see. And this is more like what happened for AMC. Would have been like this first move looks like it's going to take off, right? But then it actually does go on the outside of this creek, but then it doesn't ever take off, and then it craps out coming back the other way. That's more like what happened in 2020 for AMC. It was something more like this. So if you look back at that chart, you'll see what I mean. This ends up being very predictive later of where it's going to go, but before it does that, it goes all the way back down to the floor, which didn't get traded. And, you know, like I said, it's not like everything looks like AMC, but that's a typical accumulation pattern. So it's not exactly unusual either to think that it could do something like that before pushing up to the upside. So I'm not suggesting everything squeezes into the same time period, but this could be way later. So it's not necessarily a bad chart. I think the weekly is very positive. This divergence is very, very positive. You just got to be careful because that divergence is there, but it does not necessarily mean that it's going to go anywhere unless it breaks out of the trend, and I don't think it's happened yet. So even though this looks like it's being fulfilled, if this comes up and it's over, especially on the weekly, if it's overbought and it's just hitting the outside of this trend, that doesn't mean much, you know. That could very well be the end of it right here. So that divergence is kind of done. Like that's the trade. It already happened. It was fulfilled, so to speak, you know. And that probably was a pretty big move if you got in even on this little rebound at 53 cents and it goes up to the top. That's a 325% move. I mean, it's a big play. So I would be very cautious about maybe overemphasizing that, even though it is bullish, the divergence, I mean. So if this comes up again and hits the top, see what happens if it comes back down. Does it hold supports here? Does it break through this? And if it breaks through this, then I think you've kind of got your answer. More than likely, it's going to continue to come back down. It may do so on the outside of the creek or on the inside, but that's the strength of the chart, right? And it's kind of obnoxious, but you have to think about, this happens all the time. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a widening or if it's a narrowing. If a chart has I think Bukowski talks about it as well, because he talks about if there's a retracement or if there's a pullback that's like a throwback, it adjusts. So like what he means is that if you come up here and there's a pattern and it hits 2, 2, 3, 3, and then you're like, oh, it's going to go. If everything else is in store, then most of the time what you're thinking is that it's going to come right back up and meet the top, because that's where the pattern started, right? It was like here. And that is true. That's usually a really good breakout target. So if this holds, it goes right back up, you're good. The same thing applies for maybe like a wedge, although, it could depend on how that wedge is established. But if the wedge starts off pretty well and it's consistent, then most of the time you're thinking, oh, it's going to make a 60%, 62% move back up. Should be right there. So you should have some kind of a place of continuity. The problem is that doesn't have to be the case, because and what he talks about is he talks about what's called like a throwback, or if it pulls back lower. So what could happen is that, and we've seen this on like AMC, is that this could push out and, for example, like fail to advance. And then you end up with like a cat ear, right? And this thing that was clearly like a wedge formation doesn't actually reach its target, fails to reach its target, right? And you get kind of a breakdown. And this is a notoriously bad one for us on AMC, right? And that doesn't mean that this original breakout, weirdly enough, this is what we find with the S-curve, is that we found that actually still exists, right? It just doesn't happen here, it happens here. And that's what he was saying, like it affects the long position because it changes the starting point. And then the same goes for an outer breakout like this. Is like you might assume that it's going to go up, but what if it stops off in the middle and then fails to continue and it loses its trend? Then you could be in a situation where you're going back down, really back to the bottom, and the throwback, that completely throws it off. And this kind of stuff happens, like it just does. So it's never a guarantee that you're going to go like straight up. You really have to be careful. So if you were setting like stops, you'd probably set a stop on entry and say, I don't want it to throw back down through my entry point. So after it broke out here, like I don't want it to go back beneath where it exited the channel, right? Or maybe that low right before, if it's like close to it. And that would be a good stop loss, because at least then if it comes back through your scratch play, or you're out with a minimal loss, and you're not riding the tailwind down. And so that's my bigger concern with something like this, is that it is a slight widening, but it wouldn't take a lot to kind of have some alternative happen. If the market sells off around this 203 area, you got to watch out for that. If it does hold, then you're good to go. Then I think you've got a pretty good chance over time of getting up to 10. But it's over time, Yeah, I like Wolf. I think for Wolf, I'm looking for like a longer position, so that's where I'm gonna be on it. But I think it's a decent trade. So I'm looking at that March 21st, 14 strike. But I'll post that in the Discord group in a bit if I get into it. I'm most concerned about Apple right now. I think I just went back to 0 on my position. No, Booksy. I don't know, man. It's a weird patterning here today. It really looks like it's trying, like wedge kind of thing. It's really trying to break back to the upside. This is bizarre. It's like quadruple bottom on MFI. It's just, I know it's the 6 minute, but geez Louise, like that's a lot. So it's just really struggling. I don't know what's going on with the money flow. RSI is weird today too. It's kind of arcing upward here. This is arcing down. I don't know. To me, it looks like it's wedging, and if it breaks back up, it's probably going to go back to the wedge on the daily. Yeah, it's probably going to head back to 224.30. So maybe we end the day at 224. Or 223.90s or something. It doesn't look very strong going into next week, but I'd have to look at the bigger picture, you know. Yeah, all right, I'm in Wolf. I might trade it partial. If it comes back down, I'll probably add some. I'm done, Race. I'm sorry. I have to go. So I know it's a bummer, but I appreciate it. If you guys want to ask me next week, you can ask me next week. So I will be here. CRSR. Yeah, we'll check it out. You too. You guys have a good weekend with your families and enjoy the, if you can, enjoy the weather. I don't know. My weather's not very enjoyable, but appreciate y'all hanging out. And we will talk to you next week.